In a remote village, respectable people in elegant black solemn robes stepped into the house of a peasant family. Meanwhile, the father was confused and hurriedly hid his little white-haired daughter, dirty and lying on the floor, while the honored guests apologized for their bluntness and explained that they had heard. A child of the gods had appeared in the village. Immediately, the mother, with a calculating look, pushed forward her well-groomed older daughter Alice with golden hair. She proudly announced that the child was the pride of the family. Alice suddenly froze, wondering if she really was a divine child, while the nobles looked at her in amazement. Respected official bowed, praised Alice's beauty, and affirmed that there was no doubt she was a divine child, after which he offered to take her to the magnificent divine hall, and the mother was delighted at the prospect of going to such a prestigious place. The father feigned concern for his daughter and begged the respectable people to allow the whole family to go with her. Eventually, one of them agreed to take them the next day, while the little blonde sister stood in the corner silently suffering. When the time came, the mother coldly ordered the white-haired sister to stay home and watch the house because they had to go on errands. Then the couple took Alice by the hand and led her into the deep forest in the middle of the night. The younger sister rushed after them, asking where they were going and where the magnificent divine hall was, but the father indifferently pushed her away and rudely said that a child unworthy of being the sister of the divine child had no right to go to the hall. The father cruelly pushed the girl to the ground and coldly said that they no longer needed her, after which the couple turned and left, ignoring her plaintive cries begging them not to abandon her, leaving her bent over alone in the abandoned forest with eyes full of shock and pain. Father, mother, her voices echoed in the quiet old forest. There was no answer, only backs retreating, and suddenly a memory surfaced. She and her sister were twins born in this poor village, but since then their fates had completely diverged. Since childhood, the sisters were constantly compared, and the beautiful, talented older Alice was always the center of attention. The younger white-haired sister realized she had nothing special, so being cast aside like a useless thing seemed inevitable, and she remained sitting, hugging her knees and crying alone in the thickets. The next day after she was expelled, the girl in worn clothes wandered through the forest, gathering wild berries along the road to quell her hunger. She happily thought that she had not yet encountered a single monster, but the deep loneliness in the wild wilderness began to press on her little mind. After a long, relentless walk, her bare feet were covered in mud, and she, completely exhausted, sharply sat down on the grass. She was tired and wondered if she would die in the forest. Suddenly, a loud rustle sounded from the bushes behind her. She shuddered and turned around in fright. In front of her stood a large, pure white horse, which radiated a shimmering, magical light. She looked enchanted at its flawless beauty and exclaimed how beautiful the horse was, but when it approached she shrank, covered her face with her hands, and trembling with anxiety, screamed. The white horse lowered its head low, its muzzle barely touching the ground, and the girl with white hair asked in surprise if it wanted her to ride. Shyly climbing onto its back and clutching its soft fur, she felt the horse suddenly dash forward. The wind rushing past carried her, she exclaimed. Wonderful, and thought to herself whether this was some kind of spirit beast, and racing through the boundless mountains, she wondered where it would take her, when the horse suddenly stopped and tore a red wild berry from a tree. The horse brought the berry as a gift, touched it, moved, she whispered, "For me," then hugged its neck and sincerely thanked it with a radiant smile. Then the horse led her to a cave wrapped in giant roots, leaving the girl confused and not understanding where she had ended up. Entering the cave, the girl froze. Opposite her stood two legendary creatures, eagles above, lions below. Suddenly she remembered fairy tales and recognized griffins in them, heavenly birds, but instead of attacking, a small griffin brought her fragrant fruits, and she, moved, sincerely thanked it. The girl felt that this was not a dream. Creatures gently warmed her around. She rubbed her eyes, and realizing she had wandered so deep into the forest, pondered about the future. Her heart tightened when she realized that the old house with cold furniture was no longer for her, and from then on she decided to seek a new purpose precisely there. The next morning she felt happy because in the griffin's nest there were ordinary things, blankets and a waterskin. She went down to the stream, washed her face, and refreshed herself with cold water while the creatures nearby also drank. Then she began to worry. She had never made decisions on her own before and did not know where to start to achieve her goal. Then she wondered if she could somehow help others. She tried to talk to the griffins but did not understand their language. She apologized for the language barrier and quietly dreamed of being able to speak with them and ease her loneliness a little. Feeling that she only received their care, she desperately wanted to repay these four for their kindness in some way. Forest dwellers. Looking around the nest, she screamed with joy when she found a bristle brush and thought that maybe griffins liked to collect such things. She raised the brush to the little griffin and, holding her breath, asked if it hurt him to be brushed. The small creature made pleasant sounds, and a great relief and happiness spread through her heart. Seeing that the little griffin was delighted, she cheerfully asked, "Are you following your older sister?" Immediately, the other griffins and the white horse ran up and surrounded them, looking expectantly. Seeing their excitement, she smiled and asked if they wanted her to comb them, so she gently began to care for each coat from tiny griffins to the big white horse, all lined up with satisfied faces, and seeing how thanks to her small act the creatures lived in harmony and happiness, the white-haired girl sincerely smiled with joy, and for the first time felt her own worth by helping others. She smiled gently, even a small deed allowed her to do something for others, and it made her very happy in the quiet night under the bright moon, but sitting in the nest. She began to worry because the griffin mother returned from hunting late, and she was afraid that something bad had happened during it. Just then the cry of the griffin sounded, and she joyfully exclaimed, greeting them. Joy's happiness quickly turned to fear when she saw the griffin mother return with bleeding wounds all over her body, and she rushed to her, asked if she was okay, and whispered that these injuries must hurt terribly. She understood that hunting always hides insidious dangers, then bowed her head into the griffin's mother's fur, her face full of pity and sorrow. Falling asleep next to the majestic creatures, she whispered to herself that she truly loved this family of griffins, and fervently prayed that no one else would suffer or feel pain, and then in her dream. She saw herself as if floating in a mystical space flooded with dazzling light and flickering particles of souls. She woke up with a puzzled look, not understanding the meaning of that strange dream. Waking up, she gasped, "Wow," because Mother Griffin had completely changed, and her skin shone with gold in the sun. She praised the new feathers real gold, incredibly beautiful and majestic, and Mother Griffin blushed and bowed her head from such a keen gaze, but the girl could not contain her delight and hugged her. Seeing that Mother Griffin was embarrassed, the girl innocently asked, embarrassed, and suddenly felt a miracle she could understand what Mother Griffin was trying to say. This deeply moved her, and she wondered when she had acquired such an ability, so she decided to try talking with other griffins and the white horse to see what would happen. The girl listened intently, but in the end had to admit that she did not understand the language of the other friend, and wondered why she only understood Mother Griffin, perhaps because her appearance had changed. Then she remembered yesterday's dream, where a voice asked if she wanted to protect Lulanda. She nodded and froze in amazement, thinking whether Lulanda was herself. She wondered if that dream was connected to the strange changes around her, until the other griffins began to envy that only their Mother Griffin could talk to the girl. When Mother Griffin explained that to understand everyone, she needed to make a contract. The girl naively asked what that was, and learned that it was enough to perform a nomming for the agreement to take place. Recalling Tally's words, she remembered that the nomming of spirit beasts was very important, quietly asked if she could really do it, and Mother Griffin reassured her everything was fine because everyone already considered her their own. When the word family was spoken, the white-haired girl froze with excitement, then smiled happily and accepted that she, the horse, and the griffin friends were now a real family. In her thoughts, she realized that she once envied other children from the village who laughed with their families and believed that family were the most important people, but now she felt warmth from Mother Griffin and the spirit beast friends nearby. Tears of joy rolled down her cheeks as she quietly whispered the word family, and Mother Griffin anxiously bent down, asking if everything was all right. The white-haired girl wiped her tears and beamed, firmly saying, "Yes, we are family." Hugged Little Griffin, and the white horse and other creatures rejoiced at the sacred bond. She enthusiastically announced that she would start inventing names for everyone, sat thoughtfully, because it was the first time she had to give names, and Mother Griffin and the spirit beasts waited silently and hopefully. Finally, she found suitable names, pointed and joyfully declared, Mother Griffin Rhymer and Father Rolmer. Continuing this emotional surge, she named all members of the extended family, the pair of griffins Rilha and Kamiha, and their children Lemma, Luma, and Lumia, then the white horse Saipho and the rest of the young griffins Wanon, Lion, and Yuan, but as soon as she finished turning them into gnomes, a strange surge of energy burst from her body, causing her to stagger and wonder, could this be what people call magic? When everyone was given new names, the griffin Mother Rhymer gently asked if the girl was having a hard time and if she needed anything. The white-haired girl looked at her torn clothes and quietly admitted that she lacked clean clothes to change into. Rhymer immediately smiled and assured that clothes would be prepared at once. The girl sat confused, imagining griffins awkwardly tying with their claws, and just then the white horse Sifo brought her a shiny red apple, which she happily took, and Sifo began to playfully tease her, making her genuinely laugh in the quiet forest. While they were having fun, Saipho suddenly froze and signaled the girl to hide behind his back. He sensed a strange presence very close. The white-haired girl shuddered with fear and wondered if it was some dangerous spirit beast. Both held their breath and stared intently at the dense bushes trembling before them. Suddenly, animal ears and a fluffy tail flashed from the bushes in front of the girls. The soft appearance and fluffy fur dispelled her fear and replaced it with boundless curiosity. She reached out to Morphu Morphu, to the softness of the creature hiding, and suddenly noticed a pair of shining eyes looking at her. Unable to resist the cuteness, the girl stepped closer and gently extended her hand to touch the fluffy tail, imagining hugging it. The movement made Sappho flinch and shout a warning, and as soon as she touched it, a sharp voice roared, "Don't touch me," causing the girl to recoil in surprise. When the bushes parted, before the white-haired girl and Sappho stood not an animal, but a young werewolf with proud wolf ears and a tail. The beast boy looked at her shocked and wary, and she was still stunned because the fluffy creature she reached out to was a teenage werewolf. In the ancient forest, the white-haired girl Lulanda and the horse Sappho stood opposite the vigilant beast, and in Lulanda's eyes arose sincere curiosity and admiration at the appearance of a new friend. The young man was still shaking after the human touched his tail, and then Lulanda quietly called, and he flinched. With shining eyes, Lulanda innocently asked if she could touch his ears and tail again, and this so confused the beastly boy that he blushed and stammered, what? But Lulanda couldn't resist. She rushed to hug the fluffy tail, stroked it, and exclaimed with delight how soft it was, while the boy only helplessly groaned from this sudden assault. Satisfied with her curiosity, Lulanda released her grip with a wide, satisfied smile. While the beast path was still recovering, Sappho suddenly spoke, and the girl turned around, asking what had happened. The beast boy seriously explained that for their people, ears and tails are extremely important things. Usually only a life partner can touch them, and this embarrassed Lulanda. She couldn't understand what life partner meant. When she heard that life partner means husband and wife, and that her action now makes the boy responsible, Lulanda froze for a moment and imagined them getting married in a chapel. But she slyly changed the subject, saying she touched him because she heard it had special meaning. The boy angrily asked where she heard that, and was stunned when he realized Lulanda understood everything and made a contract with him. Still in shock, the boy asked again with a trembling voice if Lulanda was really recognized, and signed a contract with Skyhorse. Lulanda smiled and said she wasn't quite sure if it was official, but for now they lived peacefully together. The boy calmed down and introduced himself as Gaes, and Lulanda gladly gave her name and asked with interest why he was so lonely deep in the forest. Gaes began to speak, explaining that he was traveling with his father and a few others to bring gifts to a deity. He fell behind the group because he was completely captivated by a song. Hearing this, Lulanda guessed that the song might have been theirs with Sappho, and quietly recalled that she had asked the griffins to prepare new clothes, hoping they could help. Lulanda, tormented by guilt because her singing caused Gaes to get lost, sincerely apologized and earnestly asked him to come with her. The boy, embarrassed, asked where she was going, and Lulanda decisively replied that they were heading to the griffins. She and Gaes jumped on Sappho's back and rushed through the forest so fast that Gaes screamed in terror at the speed and recklessness. When they returned to the nest, Lulanda shouted joyfully, "I'm here again," and ran to hug the young griffins like Vanon and Lemma. Meanwhile, Guy stood as if rooted to the spot, his face pale with disbelief. This girl lived among noble griffins. The boy trembled, not understanding how a person named Lulanda could appear and be accepted right in the nest of the celestial birds. Lulanda calmly said with a trembling voice that her family had abandoned her, so now this place was her home, and these words stunned Guy. Worried, he asked if she was okay after being abandoned. Lulanda smiled happily, hugged the griffin tightly, and gladly declared that everyone here was now her new family. And then Guyas told the mother griffin Ryamer that he had fallen behind his father during the offering procession, which made Ryamer take the matter seriously. Lulanda asked with curiosity about the altar, and learned that it was a place where beastfolk regularly brought offerings, and suddenly she thought that Guy's father might still be nearby. She asked Ryamer and the other griffins to help search for him. Guy stood stunned, watching as Lulanda really spoke with the celestial birds and gave them orders. Finally, Lulanda stopped and smiled warmly at Guy, reassuring him that the mother griffin would soon bring his father. When Mother Griffin Ryamer led the group back to the nest, Guy's father was shocked to find himself before the sacred nest of the celestial birds, and Guy immediately joyfully called, "Father," because of which the man exclaimed his son's name in surprise. But the father instantly fell to his knees and began to apologize to the griffins, fearing that his son might have offended them. The father sincerely begged the griffins to punish him instead of his son. At that moment, Lulanda stepped forward and quietly asked if he was Guy's father. The man, embarrassed, introduced himself as a man named Otto and curiously asked the girl's name. Gaius immediately intervened to prevent him from doing so and hurriedly explained to his father that he had caused no trouble at all. Jaya awkwardly explained that he had simply followed a song, stumbled upon Lulanda and the heavenly horse, and she had spun him like a top and brought him here. Otto's listened, pondered, and asked Lulanda to clearly explain what had happened. Lulanda, with the serious expression of an adult, remained calm and a little naive. The beastfolk who accompanied the group all froze in amazement upon seeing how such a tiny person lived peacefully with the noble griffins. Guy explained that for an ordinary person living here was unthinkable, and he himself had not yet figured everything out, while Otto again insisted, Was the agreement between Lulanda and the sky birds really real? Lulanda asked, puzzled, why Otto addressed her so respectfully, and said directly that she did not like it. Otto explained that because of the contract with the sky birds, he could not be rude. However, Lulanda firmly refused. She felt that polite forms of address made relationships cold, and she wanted everyone to speak to her simply, in a human way. Otto finally agreed to fulfill her request and call the girl simply Lulanda, which made Lulanda happy, and she exclaimed, "Yes," then asked with interest what the beastfolk usually brought. Otto smiled and explained that once every few months they brought food or things liked by the griffins, small gifts to maintain the connection, although they did not quite understand each other's language. Otto was surprised when he found clothes and shoes in the offering basket exactly the size of Lulanda. The girl warmly thanked and, on Guy's advice, quickly changed into the new dress. When Lulanda appeared in a flawless white dress adorned with delicate flowers, she shyly asked Guy if it suited her, which made Beast Boy blush and become so embarrassed that he could not say a word. Guy awkwardly praised that the dress suited her very well, and Lulanda smiled happily. Finally, clean, beautiful clothes. Then Otto announced it was time to return to the village, to which Lulanda asked if it was far, and was told the village was to the east, about a week on foot. Having learned about the beastfolk village, Lulanda gently smoothed her new dress and thought about all the help she had received. She passionately longed to see the outside world, to find ways to help her family of spirit beasts, so she dared to ask Otto and the griffins to allow her to accompany them to the beastfolk village. Otto raised his eyebrows in surprise and asked, "To our village?" Then confirmed he had no objections, but at that moment the griffin mother Rhymer made an unexpected proposal that stunned Lulanda. Rhymer said that Lulanda should not just visit, it would be better for her to stay in that village for a long time, which raises a big question about the future of the white-haired girl. Standing before Mother Griffin after Rhymer's proposal to leave, Lulanda could not hold back tears, and through pain asked why Rhymer could say such a thing. After all, she already considered this place her home. Rhymer gently bowed and calmed her, saying that she spoke only out of concern, because Otto's and others agreed that Lulanda, as a human, would find it easier to live among people. When Rhymer firmly said that if Lulanda left she would go with her, because family must always be together, Lulanda suddenly felt relief and looked at Otto with eyes full of hope. The girl said that she wanted to move to the village of beastfolk, but only if her entire family of spirit beasts went with her, and Otto simply froze at such a bold decision. Lulanda bowed, lowering her voice almost to a whisper, fervently begged Otto's for help, although she knew it could cause problems and her sincerity was evident. Otto closed his eyes for a moment, thought, and then finally nodded and agreed to negotiate with the villagers, while Gaia stood nearby and looked anxiously at her new friend. Seeing that Lulanda was still hesitant, Gaia approached and reassured her. His father would handle everything, and he himself was not against her coming to the village. Thanks to his passionate support, Lulanda beamed with a bright smile and thanked him, and immediately Otto's loudly and solemnly announced that Lulanda could live in their village. Lulanda's joy blossomed even more when Otto confirmed that bringing griffins and the Sappho horse was possible without any problems. But the beastfolk father grew grim and sternly reminded that accepting a human into the village must be done carefully and with thorough preparation, because Lulanda might not know in the human world there are those who do not consider beastfolk equal. Otto spoke in a heavy, grim voice about the harsh truth. Humans often hunt beastfolk and turn them into slaves, and he feared that even though griffins are the village's protectors, Lulanda's arrival could still provoke complicated feelings among the villagers. When he heard this, Gaia's heart ached. Language could be understood and laughed over together, but the chasm between races still remained enormous. Lulanda was shocked and admitted that she had never known such extreme views existed. Otto nodded in confirmation and said that this was why he needed more time to properly arrange everything for her. Lulanda quietly nodded in agreement, and the griffin mother Rhymer looked at the sky and noticed that another day was coming to an end. Noticing that the forest would become too dangerous at night, Lulanda, with a joyful sparkle in his eyes, invited Otto's and his son to spend one night at the griffin nest so they would be safe. Otto's was horrified. He considered sleeping in a sacred place to be a great sacrilege, while Lulanda happily clapped her hands and exclaimed with delight at the thought of a cozy night in a close circle. She even grabbed Gaia's hand and asked him to sleep next to her. The sudden invitation from Lulanda made Gaia blush to his ears and, stammering embarrassedly, refuse, but when he looked into her wide-open eyes. Hearing her naive plea, "I want us to be together," Beastby was completely won over. Guy could only sigh sadly before Lulanda's sweet determination, and finally everyone fell into a peaceful sleep on the soft rug in the griffin nest. Guy slept so deeply that his mouth was open. The young griffins cuddled nearby in warm balls, and Lulanda did not sleep and could not resist the temptation to stroke his fluffy tail, touching it while her friend murmured in his sleep, "Don't touch me," ending the turbulent day with a small, quiet happiness. After several preparations, the group returned to the edge of the forest to pick up Lulanda. Otto beamed a wide smile and shouted at the top of his voice that all preparations in the village were complete. This made the girl hiding behind the griffin mother raise her eyes wide open and full of impatience, and everyone immediately agreed to set off for the beastfolk village. When the group set off, Lulanda walked silently, and her thoughts incessantly wandered around the new home. She wondered what the beastfolk village would look like and whether they would accept her there as a friend, then stepped forward, politely bowed to Otto and thanked him, after which she announced that she would set off riding on Sappho. To make the journey faster and easier for the little ones, Lulanda excitedly showed a huge woven basket that she and others had woven together. She explained that the young griffins would be placed in the basket, so the griffin mother could lift them into the air. This way, they would not have to spend so much energy, and the journey would be shorter, so the group would reach the beastfolk settlement faster. Otto was stunned with amazement when he realized that the griffin gods would personally help with the transportation. He silently felt gratitude and ordered the group to prepare. Prepare to lead everyone after you. Above, Lulanda, riding Sappho, galloped through the ancient forest. Above them floated a woven basket, and Gaia exclaimed excitedly as the village of beastfolk began to appear through the lush crowns. Before Lulanda stretched the village of beastfolk, simple, peaceful straw houses, cozily nestled in the valley, and she couldn't hold back. Is this the village of beastfolk? But her brief joy quickly faded. Anxiety gripped her when she saw peasants below, with wary faces, whispering about the appearance of a human. Feeling the tense atmosphere and unfriendly glances of the peasants, Lulanda anxiously grasped the edge of her dress, gathered her courage, and took a step forward. She quietly introduced herself and bowed sincerely. Her polite gesture prompted Mother Griffin and the young griffins to bow in unison as a formal greeting to the peasants. The griffins' humility before the little human girl stunned the entire beastfolk community. They panicked and shouted, "Griffins, please raise your heads." Otto stepped forward to calm the crowd and explained that the village was surrounded by dense forest and dangerous for those traveling alone. Gaia proudly introduced Lulanda to her father and revealed that he was the village chief, and Otto said. He said he needed to discuss a very important matter with the girl. Otto spoke in a heavy voice and asked Lulanda to seek help from the griffin to tame the spirit beasts surrounding the forest and protect the peasants. He also asked her to help calm those who harbored complex and hostile feelings toward humans, and Lulanda immediately nodded. She wanted to repay the village that sheltered her. Then froze when she realized that her appearance forced Otto to face strong public pressure, and with tears in her eyes, Lulanda whispered an apology to Otto for her selfish demands that put him in an awkward position. And the village elder only smiled gently, elegantly, and tousled her hair. He admitted that convincing the peasants would be difficult, but emphasized that being allied with the griffin friends was a great honor. Otto promised never to allow anyone to harm her, because opposing the griffins and Skyhorse was taboo for the beastfolk. The conversation became even more cheerful when Otto teased Guy, saying that he loves Lulanda so much that he talks about her all the time. Guy blushed and exclaimed indignantly, "What are you saying, father?" Watching the playful exchange between father and son, Lulanda smiled sincerely. She innocently asked if she and Guy were really friends, and he, a little embarrassed and shy like a beast, replied that he had long considered her his friend, warmly concluding their first meeting in the new village. Lulanda's eyes shone with joy at his confirmation, and she happily smiled to herself, thinking that this was her first true friend. Then Guy joyfully spread his arms and encouraged her to try to get to know people and make many new friends in the village. Seeing that Lulanda was still a little hesitant about whether others would accept her, Guy tapped his chest and confidently promised to help her meet all the residents. Hearing this, Lulanda resolutely decided to do her best, while Otto quietly watched with a satisfied smile as friendship blossomed between the two children. When she entered the small wooden house prepared by the Ottos, Lulanda exclaimed with surprise how comfortable it was here, although the furniture was simple, and the village elder explained that he had repaired the abandoned house and widened the doorway so that griffins could freely enter and exit. This deeply touched Lulanda, and she sincerely thanked him. Then she noticed how the griffin chicks were trying to build a nest very close by. Lulanda reminded Guyas that every griffin has its own name and is not just called by the general nickname, skybirds, which greatly interested the beast boy. She cheerfully hugged the young griffin and explained that when called by name, everyone becomes very happy. Guy eagerly offered that he would soon introduce him to the names of all the members of his spirit beast family. As they walked through the village, Guy said that there were only 30 beastfolk here, and including him, 7 were children. Hearing this, Lulanda suddenly grabbed Guy's hand, her face tensed. The boy noticed that something was wrong and cautiously asked about it. She shyly admitted that she was extremely nervous and anxious about the upcoming meeting. Anxiety was clearly visible on Lulanda's face. She was afraid that the villagers would think badly of her. Guy reached out and gently tousled her hair, as if saying that with him nearby she had nothing to fear. This warm gesture dispelled Lulanda's fear, and she barely nodded, giving full trust to her new friend. A happy smile appeared again on Lulanda's lips as she felt the soothing, gentle stroking, and the two children walked cheerfully, holding hands. Lulanda thought to herself that since meeting Gaes, she had many firsts that you cherish. She found a friend, felt care, and was led into a new world full of hope. And the gathering finally took place when Gaes proudly introduced Lulanda to the children and announced that from today she would officially live in the village Lulanda shyly bowed and received curious but friendly looks from Shinomi, Kivu, Urukesai, Rukri, Rarido, and Dandung, while the girl with long hair thoughtfully watched her. After the meeting, Lulanda remembered the neat hairstyles of the other beast girl and looked a little shyly at her tousled hair. She quietly sat next to the griffin's mother and Guy, and then suddenly dared to cut her hair to look neater. This confused both Guy and the little griffin. To look decent at future meetings, Gaes decided to ask his father Otto for help because he often cut his hair. Soon Otto brought his tools and kindly asked Lulanda what style she wanted. She shyly threw a white cloth over her shoulders and said she had no special wishes, just a little shorter to feel satisfied and confident. In the cozy atmosphere of the new village, Lulanda beamed with a smile while being cared for and having her hair cut for the first time, and she emotionally exclaimed that she felt very happy. As Otto worked with thin, skillful cuts, he asked Lulanda to sit still so the haircut would not be spoiled. In a moment, he gently wove a flower into her hair, said everything was ready, and kindly led her to a clear bowl of water so she could admire the result. When she saw her reflection in the water, Lulanda caught her breath. Wow, she blossomed, her hair neatly styled and decorated with a cute flower, hands pressed to her cheeks, eyes sparkling with joy and confidence. This perfect moment of happiness seemed to close one chapter of her life and become the beginning of a new journey in the beastfolk village with a completely new look. After the transformation, Lulanda quietly stood and watched the lively life of the village, filled with renewed determination. She vowed to herself, step by step, to blend into this place and earn the acceptance of everyone here. Lulanda approached a pair of beastfolk who were working and offered to help, slightly surprising them. The man quickly smiled and asked her to carry a few things to the storehouse, and Lulanda gladly replied, "I'll take care of that." Full of enthusiasm, Lulanda struggled carrying a heavy basket, while the beastfolk silently watched and thought to himself that this girl seemed very close to the griffin gods. He also realized the very appearance of a human immediately attracted a lot of attention and curious looks from the surrounding villagers. Lulanda took on a day of real work. She tackled all the village chores, from helping the housewives arrange the dishes to thoroughly sweeping the yard with a broom until everything was clean. Seeing her diligence and that always shining smile, the beastman who had been watching earlier began to change his mind and quietly smiled approvingly. After a strenuous morning, Lulanda sat down on a wooden chest and wiped the sweat from her forehead. A couple of beastmen approached and praised her, saying her help was truly useful. When she heard their sincere thanks, a happy spark lit up in Lulanda's eyes. She felt that she mattered. Uplifted and full of energy, Lulanda said with passionate enthusiasm that she wanted to help even more the next day. But the woman smiled and advised her to play with the other children today, explaining that they had now gathered in the house of an old woman in the village. When Lulanda arrived, Shinomi was delighted and exclaimed how nice and cute her new hairstyle looked on her. Lulanda shyly thanked her and asked with interest about the black tablets everyone was holding. Shinomi explained that the old woman was teaching them letters and asked if Lulanda could read or write. The girl sadly admitted she had never been taught. Then the kind old beastwoman gently explained that human and beast writing are very different and invited Lulanda to join the lessons. And she promised that as soon as she learned to read, she could take any book from her shelves. Lulanda's eyes lit up with joy, and she was deeply touched by this unexpected kindness. The lesson was lively, though not easy. Suddenly Rurido pointed to Lulanda's tablet and shouted that she had written the wrong character. Lulanda was embarrassed and asked where the mistake was, and Rurido patiently showed her. But when he joked that he usually writes much neater, Lulanda was confused and froze at the straightforwardness of her new friend. Shinomi smiled and remarked that it was good that Lulanda had so quickly found friends and befriended Rarito. Lulanda gladly agreed and said she was very happy to communicate and learn together with everyone. When Shinomi said she loved cooking because her mother and teacher had taught her, Lulanda eagerly offered to help in the kitchen, and the chapter ended with a heart fluttering from the first truly important impressions in the village of Beastmen. Under the warm kitchen light, little Lulanda watched in fascination the juicy baked dish being gently brushed with golden sauce and exclaimed with delight as the fragrant aroma filled the air. Kind Beastwoman smiled and asked if she wanted to try some, and Lulanda, surprised and happy, shyly asked if she really could, then immediately tasted it so much that her cheeks puffed with joy, and she held the piece tightly in her hands, afraid the sweetness would disappear. After the first taste, her eyes shone with admiration, and she said it was the best food she had ever eaten. The woman felt warmth in her heart and smiled, saying it was good that the girl liked it. Then she opened an old book and kindly told Lulanda that if she learned to read, she would find many more delicious recipes on its pages. This incredibly excited the girl with white hair, who looked at the illustrated dishes with unstoppable determination. Lulanda boldly promised to try hard both in learning and in cooking, because she wanted to cook many tasty dishes herself, and the woman beast gladly promised to teach her everything she knew. After some time, Luland came out smiling with a basket full of bread, and a small griffin settled on her head. At that moment, Gaia called her name from afar, and Luland stopped, realizing that a close friend was approaching. Gaia ran up excitedly and offered to help carry the heavy basket, but when she was about to thank him, her foot caught on a ledge, and she fell forward. All the bread spilled on the ground, and both children panicked. Seeing Luland fall and start crying because of the spoiled bread, Gaia anxiously knelt down to ask if she was hurt, and the little griffin cried out in worry. Suddenly, a young beast-faced woman with fox ears named Zashi appeared. Seeing that Lulinda had a scratched knee, she gently took her hand and led her to her wooden house, asking her to sit on a chair and wait a little. Lulanda looked around the room full of jars and bottles of medicine and smelled a strange but pleasant scent in the air. Nearby, Gaia introduced Zashi as the best apothecary in the village. Zashi softly asked Lulanda to allow her to examine the wound, and under the worried looks of Gaia and the tiny griffin, carefully applied a cotton swab soaked in medicine to the girl's knee. Soon the wound was cleaned and bandaged, and Zashi smiled, saying everything was ready. Lulanda felt great relief and sincerely thanked the kind apothecary, to which Zashi cheerfully replied that helping was her duty. Lulanda quietly looked at the bandage on her knee with sad eyes and said she hadn't been hurt like this for a long time, but choked on her words, confessing that it was the first time someone cared for her so attentively. The warmth of Zashi's kindness moved Lulanda, and she smiled with happiness because human attention seemed warmer to her than the freshly applied medicine. Zashi gently hugged her and stroked her head, assuring her that since she was still a child, adults naturally cared for and spoiled her a little, and sincerely added that she had done everything to help the wound heal as quickly as possible. Lulanda's heart filled with deep gratitude, and she thought that although she was only learning what she was taught, this care was truly magical. It made her trust and cherish her new life in the village even more. Lulanda's eyes shone with determination. She looked up at Zashi and said she wanted to help with the work in the apothecary. Zashi was a little surprised but smiled and agreed, promising to teach her many interesting things, but the cheerful atmosphere was suddenly disturbed by noise outside, and Zashi became worried at that moment. A panicked beast person burst into the room, calling Zashi's name for help. Pale man hurriedly asked Zashi to follow him because trouble had occurred. Ashita had fallen from a steep cliff and was in critical condition. The villagers tried to pull the injured out, but the rescue dragged on and the situation only worsened. The news of the accident in the village stunned Zashi and Lulanda. Gripped by anxiety, they immediately pulled themselves together and prepared for the impending disaster. Seeing Ashita lying motionless, covered in blood and with terrible wounds, Zashi rushed to him. Calling his name, there was no response, and the men nearby were in despair and trembling, saying that in such a severe condition he might not be saved. Lulanda and Gaes stood behind and watched what was happening with confused eyes. In the sad atmosphere, Gaes helplessly shouted for someone to bring medicine, though the chances were slim, and Lulanda trembled and clung to the edge of his shirt with pain in her heart. Seeing the suffering of the villagers and remembering their kindness, Lulanda could not accept that a good person was dying before her eyes. She squeezed her eyes shut, choking on emotions, and shouted, "I don't want this." Her small hands pressed tightly to her chest as if in fervent prayer, and Gaia stood stunned, looking at her painful and strange expression. Suddenly, from Lulanda's tiny body burst a dazzling mystical white light, filling the room and causing Gaia and all the nearby beastfolk to step back, staggering in amazement. This powerful magic shone like a miracle, and Gaia could only utter her name, not believing her eyes, for the dark, desperate space was instantly illuminated by the miraculous energy emanating from the soul of the white-haired girl. When the light subsided, everyone held their breath. Ashita's deadly wounds gradually healed and miraculously disappeared, and Zashi and the others could hardly believe their eyes as his breathing began to even out. They froze, wondering what that light was and how such an impossible thing could have happened. Gaia was about to ask Lulando, but suddenly she staggered and fainted from exhaustion after expending so much energy. After a long night unconscious following that terrible incident, Lulando slowly opened her eyes and blinked, looking at the familiar wooden ceiling. Her head was spinning and her whole body ached, and she tried to sit up amid a soft pile of blankets and pillows. Luland confusedly wondered why she was sleeping here and what had happened after she saw that light. The quiet rustling of her movements in the morning silence turned into dry creaks of the bed. Suddenly the door opened, and Gaia entered with a radiant face when he noticed she had awakened. The young man exclaimed that he was glad to see she was okay and gently asked how she was feeling. Lulanda looked at Gaes with a naive gaze and asked what had happened to her. She did not remember anything about saving someone. Gaes was silent for a moment, then looked deeply into her eyes and prepared to tell the incredible truth about last night. Guy passionately explained that it was Lulanda who saved Ashita when he was on the brink of death, insisting that she was definitely not an ordinary child, that light was probably the highest divine magic. A scene of a closed meeting of the village elders flashed in memory. Zeshi also nodded skeptically, as if saying that even the high priests in the great sacred hall could not instantly apply magic that would heal mortal wounds, and everyone understood Lulanda has a power beyond human comprehension. While Lulanda was still asleep after the incident, Otto and the village elders were tensely discussing the fact that she had been near the griffins. Otto was terribly afraid that if Lulanda did not understand that special power within herself, danger could strike at any moment. But other beastfolk cautiously warned, although she is a child, human blood flows in her veins, so she cannot be fully trusted. The discussion ended in tension. They had to admit that Lulanda's existence had become a dangerous factor for the village's peace. At a secret village meeting, a kind but worried old beast-like woman said that Lulanda is simply Lulanda, and she understood that it is natural for people to fear a being with such unfathomable power, but emphasized that even if the girl is different from other children. In the short time Lulanda had lived here, she had already shown herself to be an extraordinarily kind and sensitive girl, doing everything possible to help her fellow villagers, and even exhausting her magic to the point of collapse to save someone in need. Agreeing with the old woman, the apothecary Zashi and others sincerely admitted that they truly adored the girl with white hair, and the village head Otto smiled and emphasized that no matter how special Lulanda's abilities were, she remained an irreplaceable part of the village. Gloom enveloped everyone when they realized such great magical power would inevitably make Lulanda a target for insidious people who would want to use her innate gift for dark purposes. In a cramped room, when Gaia told that Lulanda used magic to save Ashita, she froze in amazement and could not comprehend whether she had really performed such a miracle. Gaia looked at her seriously and explained that his father and other adults said, "She has very strong magic, but she used so much power on healing that she fainted." Lulanda thoughtfully lowered her head, still not fully understanding the nature of the power in her veins, and naively asked, "Isn't saving Ashita a good thing?" But Gaia suddenly became stern and scolded her, pityingly and anxiously repeating his father's warning that exhausting magic could lead to death, not just fainting. Hearing this, Lulanda gently smiled and replied that even if she had to give her life if it would save everyone, she would consider it a worthy sacrifice. Lulanda's naive words upset Gaia. He slammed his hand on the bed and angrily shouted that the meeting was not like that, looked at her sternly because she seemed not to understand why she was being scolded, and Lulanda only opened her eyes wide and looked completely innocent. Gaes restrained his anger and asked if she truly cared about everyone in the village, and if she would feel pain if they all suddenly disappeared. Lulanda nodded sadly in confirmation. Gaes jumped to his feet and loudly declared that everyone in the village feels the same about Lulanda. He supposed that if she saw how he returned from hunts every day covered in wounds, she would be terribly worried. Gaia bowed her head in pain and emphasized that no one would be happy if she had to sacrifice her life for others, stepped closer and firmly squeezed Lulanda's small hand, as if reminding her of her worth. And with tears in Tyra's eyes and trembling in his voice, he desperately begged Lulanda never to think about such a sacrifice again, saying that the very thought of it caused him great pain and asked her to take better care of herself. Then, overwhelmed with emotions, Guy shouted that she must understand everyone considers her incredibly important. His decisive actions stunned Lulanda, and she fell silent, listening to every sincere word. Lulanda looked at Guy with surprise, and a tear rolled down her cheek. She was stunned by his sudden outburst of emotions. Seeing this, Guy instantly became confused and panicked, asking if he had said too much or shouted so loudly that he scared her, awkwardly raising both hands in a calming gesture, apologizing and regretting that he could not restrain his concern for her. Lulanda hastily wiped away the tear and smiled, explaining that she was not sad but filled with happiness. She admitted that no one had ever cared and worried about her like that before, even to the point of anger. The feeling that others valued her as much as she valued them filled Lulanda's heart with a warm glow. When her radiant smile returned, Gaia sighed with relief, realizing that his feelings had reached her heart, and suddenly Lulanda beamed and boldly said, "I really like Gaia," making the young beastman blush and jump in surprise, then innocently added that she also loved Uncle Otto and everyone in the village, causing Gaia to shout loudly, "What?" Lulanda just tilted her head and giggled, ending this emotional conversation with a cute misunderstanding and an even deeper bond between the white-haired girl and her beastman friends. She smiled gently and said she understood what Gaia meant and firmly promised from now on not to do anything reckless to avoid making everyone worry. Hearing this, Gaia took Lulanda's small hand in relief as a sign of agreement. He nodded and said it was good that she understood, but suddenly, a voice calling Lulanda interrupted their private moment from the open door. The door opened and the village elders Odos and Ishida entered. Odos anxiously asked if Lulanda was really well enough to sit up, and she promptly replied that she had fully recovered thanks to Gaia's attentive care. Then Ishida approached the bed with a grateful expression, said he had heard everyone saying she healed him with magic, and sincerely thanked Lulanda for saving his life from the brink of death. Lulanda opened her eyes wide and quietly said she acted because she sincerely wanted to save him, and Ashida, still moved, repeated again that it was thanks to her that he could live on. He advised Lulanda that with her small stature she should not constantly overexert herself, and the white-haired girl smiled brightly and nodded in agreement with his warning in the presence of Gaia's and Otto's. Suddenly Otto had an idea and asked if, when Lulanda felt completely well, she would agree to go to the old woman in the village. Lulanda asked in surprise if it was to learn magic, and the chief confirmed, explaining that he wanted her to learn how to properly use her power. The scene shifted to her first lesson. Lulanda focusedly held a pen and wrote on a clean sheet under the old woman's guidance, while little griffins watched her inquisitively. The old beast-like woman seriously explained that magic is a great power which, depending on how it is used, can bring both good and harm, and insisted that to prevent a repeat of the dangerous event that happened recently, Lulanda must learn more about it. She sincerely admitted that she herself did not possess magic and could only pass on book knowledge to the girl. Lulanda fell silent and wondered if better mastery of magic would allow her to help people more. The old beast-like woman looked at Lulanda with tenderness and called her a truly good girl, touched by the girl's desire to learn magic to protect others, but she warned her not to overdo it and insisted that Lulanda use magic only after completing her training and when she fully learned to control it. The girl with white hair answered decisively, "Yes, I understand," her face shining with determination, which pleased the old woman. She praised the answer as good and reminded her to keep that promise. Lulanda and Gaes carefully studied the old magic book under the guidance of the old woman. While the children immersed themselves in new knowledge, a quiet anxiety stirred in the old woman's heart. She recalled that many powerful magicians in history tragically died after being used by others. She feared that Lulanda was still so young, and evil people might appear who would try to force the girl to use her power for dark purposes. While Lulanda, absorbed in her leaf, sat next to the griffin holding a pencil, the old beast-like woman quietly watched with a stern, unwavering expression and told herself that because of those hidden dangers, the villagers must unite and protect the blonde girl at any cost. The scene shifted from the peaceful village to a dark ancient forest, where the dense tree crowns seemed to hide a secret that was about to be revealed. In the gloomy ancient forest, a mysterious figure in a black cloak moved silently, alertly watching the surroundings, stopped near an old tree, and lightly touched the ground as if searching for traces or sensing residual magical currents. The figure whispered that although the forest teemed with dangerous spirit beasts, if that girl was truly genuine, she must be alive. So the shadow moved deeper into the thicket, determined to find even the smallest trace of the blonde girl at any cost. The mysterious figure raised their eyes, revealed a cold, unwavering face, and loudly swore, "I will definitely find you." Meanwhile, in the werebeast village, Lulanda still shone with happiness, talking with Gaes, unaware that a new storm was quietly approaching, foretelling great upheavals and soon overturning the peaceful life she had just built. After an intense lesson, the old werebeast woman smiled and announced a break, promising to tell the girl the history of magic and teach more complex spells next time. Lulanda cheerfully thanked her. Gaes said goodbye lively, and just as they stepped outside, Lulanda suddenly noticed the unexpected arrival of the young griffins Vanon and Lumia, circling in the sky, and exclaimed with delight. Her eyes sparkled with joy at the warm greeting of her familiar spirit beasts. But the joyful mood instantly turned to shock when Lulanda realized that the griffins had brought a stranger to the village. She froze and shouted, "Human," seeing a motionless figure on the floor, while the griffins indicated that they had found this person barely alive in the forest and brought them back. Seeing a strange woman in critical condition, Lulando and Guy were stunned and could not understand how a person ended up so deep in the forest, but Lulando dismissed doubts and firmly insisted that she must be saved. They brought her into the house and provided aid. The mysterious woman slowly regained consciousness and hurriedly drank water to quench her burning thirst. The village beastfolk gathered around the bed with wary, curious faces, not understanding how a stranger could have passed through a forest full of spirit beasts alone. After recovering a little, the woman looked at everyone with eyes full of gratitude and sincerely thanked them. At that moment, Chief Otto stepped forward and explained that Lulanda had asked to bring her here for treatment, which made the woman freeze in surprise, looking at the little girl with white hair. The woman, stunned, could not believe her eyes. Could a human child live so peacefully among beastfolk? Otto seriously said that although Lulanda was human, she was extremely important to his tribe. The woman nodded, understood, and then asked with interest why the villagers risked taking in a child in the middle of this deadly forest. When asked about the purpose of her journey, the mysterious woman choked up with emotion and admitted that she was actually searching for a very special person. The woman introduced herself as a researcher driven by a passionate desire to learn. She ventured alone into the deep forest. She shyly admitted that she had become exhausted and fainted on the way, and only the griffins saved her. Suddenly she looked directly at Lulanda and boldly suggested that this girl might be the very one she was looking for. This statement embarrassed Lulanda. She pointed to herself and asked, "Me," and tension instantly filled the room and suspicions flared among everyone. Seeing the villagers with wary and angry faces after the mention that they would take Lulanda away, the woman panicked and waved her hands, trying to explain that she had no intention of taking the girl from here. Breathless, she hurriedly swore that whatever the confirmation, she only wanted to stay in the village to observe the girl and help her, begging Ottos to allow her to live there and complete her mission, which left the chief and Gaes frozen in stunned silence at the audacity and recklessness of this uninvited guest. Hearing the sincere request, Lulanda pondered and asked Guy for permission to speak alone with the woman to better understand everything. Guy immediately objected. Firmlish was afraid she herself might be in danger near such a mysterious stranger. Seeing Lulinda's determination, Guy finally agreed in the condition that White Horse Sappho stay nearby to protect her. The dispute ended with a temporary agreement, but the young beastfolk's face still showed anxiety. When only the two of them remained in the room with Sappho, the woman introduced herself as Lendono Stoffer, asking to be called simply Lan. She enthusiastically noted Lulando's pure beauty and gently shifted the conversation, asking if the girl knew about the existence of a divine child. Lan began to prepare an explanation of the deep knowledge she had studied for a long time, and this aroused obvious curiosity in Lulanda. She listened, holding her breath, as if searching for answers about the strange powers inside herself. Lan said that she worked in the city of Agata, where the magnificent divine temple stands, and studied the divine child, people endowed with divine power. When Lulanda naively asked, "Where is Agata?" she was told it was a noisy, lively metropolis. Lan continued that recently a girl considered a divine child came to the temple, and she was appointed as the teacher of that little one, and at that moment, a painful memory burst out. Outside the temple door, a cry sounded, "I don't want to." In the memory appeared the older sister Alice, a blonde who angrily shouted that she was not going to endure exhausting lessons in the temple. Alice stubbornly resisted and asked why a divine child like her had to live by such strict rules, and Lan patiently explained that divine children have enormous powers. For example, they can control the weather and therefore must learn to skillfully manage them. Alice cruelly said she would never study and brushed everything off, leaving Lan helpless, and this made Lan doubt her true nature and set off into the deep forest to find the real divine child, Lulanda. Lan continued the story of her turbulent days. She was expelled from the capital because she accidentally angered the divine child Alice. There were rumors that divine punishment had fallen on her, but she understood that no disaster had occurred and believed if punishment really exists, it will fall on liars. This suspicion pulled Lan back to the village where Alice was born to check, and there she was stunned to learn that Alice had a twin sister. Lan looked Lulanda straight in the eyes with a serious expression and asked if this girl could really be Alice's sister. Lulanda was directly asked about her relationship with Alice. She lowered her head and was silent for a moment, and the atmosphere became very tense. Lan looked at her attentively and quietly said that regardless of the answer, she sincerely wanted to stay in the village to help the girl. Lulanda, embarrassed, asked why Lan was so unwavering. Lan barely smiled, looked deep into the girl's thoughts as if she found something very important she had been searching for a long time, and firmly said she was staying because she was convinced. Lulanda herself is the divine child, no one else. Hearing this, Lulanda responded quietly with obvious shock that she was by no means so special. But Lan did not back down. She said that a homeless child living in close harmony with beastfolk and recognized by the heavenly horse is already enough proof, and Lan beamed, declaring that this was enough to devote herself entirely to protecting the girl. After a moment of hesitation, Lulanda slightly nodded and admitted that she was an abandoned younger sister, to which Lan exclaimed in astonishment, "So it is," and explained that the prophecy points to the child in that house as the divine one, and it is clearly about Lulanda. Lan loudly and once again declared that Lulanda is the true divine child, and the white-haired girl froze in place, staring in shock and disbelief, her eyes wide open with doubts about the great title she had just heard. Lulanda shyly clenched the edge of her dress and whispered that she did not want to be a divine child. This title was too much of a burden for her, and Lan, understanding her anxiety, smiled and agreed to call her simply Lulanda, which made the blonde sigh and bloom with relief. Then Lan began to ask what had changed around since she arrived, and Lulanda suddenly remembered Otto's story. Recently, the village's harvests had become strangely lush and abundant, to which Lan quietly said that this was probably the positive influence of the divine child's power spreading outward, and revealed a painful truth when she visited the old village where Lulanda was born. It was devastated by pests, and the harvest had completely failed. Lulanda was stunned and could not understand why this happened, and Lan seriously said that this was the inevitable consequence of Lan no longer being protected by the presence of the true divine child, explaining in detail. Referring to ancient records, that God loves the divine child, so the land where she lives is always blessed and does not wither, and her influence is enormous and can protect an entire nation from misfortunes and harsh weather. Lan looked at Lulanda with admiration and firmly said that the girl had made this beastfolk village richer and more prosperous than ever, proof of the invisible but powerful protective force she possesses, and resolutely declared that she believed Lulanda is the divine child who brings life wherever she goes, after which Lulanda, clutching her dress, stunned and pondered her true status, and curiously asked Lan to tell her more about the divine child. Lan gladly agreed, but immediately noticed the ominous glances of Gaia and the beastfolk outside the window. She forced a smile and told Lulanda to postpone this because the air had become too tense and stuffy. Lulanda raised her eyes to Lan with a worried face and fervently begged her not to tell anyone that she might be a divine child, because she feared that the truth would turn her peaceful life upside down. Lan met her gaze with understanding and smiled gently, agreeing to keep the secret. Meanwhile, the people of Gaia and the beast squad standing behind could not hide their anxiety and suspicion upon seeing the two whispering. Gaia rushed forward and anxiously asked if Lulanda was okay. Len stood opposite Chief Otto and again fervently asked for permission to stay in the village. Otto asked in a low voice whether a person would risk so much, and Lend resolutely replied that he was an explorer. The burning desire to uncover the truth about the divine child became her main goal in life. She looked directly at Lulanda and declared that this girl was the being she most wanted to study, while Otto's face remained stern, and he persistently asked whether the research would threaten the child, making the atmosphere extremely tense. During the interrogation by Otto, Lan bowed her head and passionately swore that she had no intention whatsoever to exploit or harm Lulanda for her own benefit. She pressed the mantle to her chest and sincerely said that she simply wanted to stay nearby to see how the girl grows and what choices she makes in the future. Lan insisted that she wanted to find out how a true divine child would live and how she would see the world, and she warned herself, if she ever said or did anything contrary to this oath, she was ready to accept any consequences. Lan looked Otto firmly in the eyes and declared that if she broke the promise, he had every right to take her life without hesitation. Seeing her extreme determination and sincerity, Otto sighed quietly and finally nodded, agreeing to temporarily trust her and allow her to stay. But he set a condition: while she lived here, the villagers would watch her closely. Len smiled brightly, agreed, and assured that being under surveillance was not a problem for her at all. After some time, Len became part of the village routine and found himself in the pharmacy together with the apothecary Zeshi and Lulanda. Zeshi gently taught Lulanda to distinguish medicinal herbs from deceptively similar poisonous ones, carefully examining the underside of the leaves. Lulanda listened attentively and willingly promised that she would be more careful on future herb-gathering trips. Just then Lan entered with a smile and immediately asked if she could help and where to put these things to lighten everyone's load. When Lan brought in a basket full of herbs that the villagers had just gathered, the villagers rejoiced. Lulanda greeted her cheerfully and asked if she was tired. Lan smiled and said she was glad to help, and following Zeshi's instructions quickly took the basket into the inner room to sort it, and it was at that moment that Lan left. Gaes hurriedly dragged Lulanda into a corner and anxiously asked if that woman had said anything strange or tried to lure the girl away from the village. His overly protective reaction left Lulanda with wide-open eyes and complete confusion. Lulanda asked Lan with interest whether she planned to help with anything else after this matter, and Lan gladly replied that she was going to the kitchen to help cook. She wanted to integrate as quickly as possible and become part of the community. She smiled to herself. Practical experience in this village of beastfolk was much more interesting and completely different from the dry knowledge in the books of the human world. Seeing Lan's enthusiasm, Gaia felt unease and even a slight headache from how quickly this uninvited guest was adapting. When Lan went to start a new task, Lulanda quietly spoke with Gaia and said she sincerely believed Lan was truly not a bad person, but Gaia still looked worried and admitted that he always carried a faint fear inside. What if someday that person took Lulanda away from the village? Noticing his unease, Lulanda came closer, put her hand on his shoulder, and sincerely assured him that she would not leave, but would always stay here with everyone. Lulanda decisively looked into Gaia's eyes and said that if she managed to make friends and get close to everyone, then she was confident Lan could too. Her words somewhat calmed the young beastfolk's anxiety, and Gaia nodded in agreement. The kitchen was bustling over a steaming cauldron of soup. Curious beastfolk women were bustling around a noisy but warm beginning for the researcher Lena Dono in this new land. In a corner of the village, young beastfolk gathered to whisper about Lan. They said she taught children well and could express herself clearly, but was unimpressive at cooking, had weak endurance, and seemed unable to fight. At that moment, Lan, next to Lulanda, was helping to dissect the carcass of a spiritual animal with her last strength. She was so exhausted that she was sweating profusely and breathing heavily, and Lulanda, standing nearby, began to worry about the new friend's health. After completing the task, the beastfolk said with a smile that for the first time it turned out very well. Lan smiled broadly and thanked him, and Lulanda decisively criticized her efforts. From afar, Gaia, carrying a wooden box, passed by and quietly observed the scene with a worried expression. Seeing this, an uncle from the beastfolk approached and patted him on the shoulder, trying to calm him. Don't look so gloomy. Chief Otto and Gaia talked face to face about the presence of the earth in the village. Otto noticed that so far the earth seemed not to want to take Lulanda. Even the griffins did not object to her presence, and the villagers watched closely. Gaia listened to his father with a sad expression and barely nodded, acknowledging that he also saw how hard Lan was trying to be accepted. Otto looked at his son with tenderness and said not to worry too much. He thought that although the hostility between beastfolk and humans was deep, hearts opened to Lan precisely because of Lulanda's presence. He claimed that it was the girl with white hair who made the beastfolk, who had never had friendly contact with humans, begin to treat humans more warmly. Gaia silently walked alongside his father, touched by these words, and realizing what a great influence Lulanda's innocent smile had brought to the village. Otto continued, saying that although he did not know whether humans and beastfolk could live together peacefully in the future, he always prayed that such a bright future would come true. Guy looked at his father, then turned and saw Lulanda happily playing in the distance, and quietly promised to do everything for this hope. The two children clasped hands and headed into the warm sunset, ending a full day with new faith in unity between species. When dinner time came and Len still had not appeared, everyone noticed, and Lulanda anxiously wondered if she had become so absorbed in work that she even forgot to eat. Suddenly she remembered that recently the light in Len's room had been constantly on at night, and suspected that she was probably staying up late working on research. Without hesitation, Lulanda decided to call Lan for food. She did not want her friend to suffer from skipping meals and lack of sleep. She quietly approached the room, knocked several times without getting a response, and saw Lan sitting intently at a table, cluttered with books and papers under the flickering flame of a kerosene lamp. The girl tiptoed and saw that Lan was so engrossed that she did not notice her. Only when Lulanda spoke very close did Lan startle, scream in fright, and almost fall off the chair. Composing herself, Lan sighed with relief upon seeing Lulanda, and quickly apologized for being so absorbed in research that she lost track of time, adding that she had long been used to forgetting about food and sleep when something deeply captivated her. Lulanda looked at the stack of documents on the table, while Lan excitedly told her that an old woman in the village had told her many fascinating stories about the founding of the beastfolk village and the origin of the Griffinsan. Lan was thrilled by this. Lulanda looked at Lan with sparkling eyes and said that she seemed to glow when doing what she loved, and the white-haired girl quietly sighed and admitted that she dreamed of being like that someday because she had not yet found anything that truly ignited passion in her. Lan gently smiled in response and said that she was very happy to receive such praise from Lulanda, and her gaze became incredibly tender as she looked at the child before her. Lan gently stroked Lulanda's head and reassured her, saying that she was still a child and did not need to rush, that she should slowly search for what makes her heart tremble, advising her to start with thinking about what she truly likes because when you take on what you love, more passion and perseverance naturally come. Lulanda listened to this wise advice with hope in her eyes and resolutely answered, yes, with a happy smile, as if opening a new page in the journey of self-discovery, and in the quiet morning light she stood alone in the empty yard, arms crossed over her chest, eyes closed to concentrate, when suddenly Gaes approached from behind and loudly shouted, "Good morning," causing the white-haired girl to startle. Surprise and embarrassment flashed across her face due to the interruption, and when Gaes anxiously asked if everything was okay, she quietly said she was practicing magic, but his sudden arrival broke her concentration, making the beast boy feel guilty and hastily apologize, thinking she was just standing confused. Lulanda gently smiled and teased that Gaes had no bad intentions at all, so it did not bother her, and this smile made the young beast boy blush with shame, after which Gaes curiously asked if that magical exercise was meant to strengthen her body. Lulanda shook her head and admitted that besides that, she still did not quite understand magic. When he insisted and asked what it feels like to sense mana, she paused for a moment and described it as a very warm feeling flowing through her body. Gaes sighed with admiration and admitted that he would also like to try magic that strengthens the body, but as a beastfolk, he did not feel mana at all. Noticing his slightly upset expression, Lulanda suddenly stepped closer and unexpectedly grabbed his hands tightly, causing the young man to jump awkwardly and call her name in confusion. Not understanding this sudden closeness, Lulanda closed her eyes, concentrated, and quietly asked Gaes if he felt anything now, and the young man noticed with surprise a strange warmth flowing from her palms into his. He asked if she was directing mana into her hands. She nodded, and he froze with admiration for the first time in his life. He touched that mysterious force that humans call mana, and on the beastfolk's face was a sacred, indescribable feeling. Lulanda impatiently asked how he felt, and Gaes thoughtfully looked at his palm and said that although he felt warmth, he still did not feel real mana within himself. Hearing this, Lulanda joyfully promised to transfer mana to him again, so that next time he would get used to it. Gaes smiled, thanked her, and set off, and just as the air began to warm, hurried footsteps and a woman's call sounded from afar, breaking the children's silence. Apothecary Zeshi appeared with a worried face and said that a group of beast people from another village had just arrived at a piece of news that shocked both Gaes and Lulanda, as guests were extremely rare at such a time. Gaes asked aloud, surprised since exchanges usually only took place on certain days of the year. Zeshi nodded and confirmed this, adding that the stranger's behavior seemed quite strange and that Chief Avtos was urgently summoning both children for a meeting. On the way to the meeting place, Lulanda walked silently with heavy steps, and a clear anxiety was visible on her face. Guy noticed her strangeness and gently asked what was wrong. Lulanda quietly admitted that she was very worried about the meeting with these unfamiliar beast people. When Gaes insisted whether she was afraid simply because they were strangers, Lulanda only nodded slightly, and a premonition of future unrest rose within her. Lulanda thoughtfully recalled all the upheavals in her life, and confessed that every time she met someone new, other people from her old village, the horse Saipho, or even Guy and his father, her life was turned upside down and brought both good and bad. She feared that this meeting would again disturb her peace, but Guy smiled reassuringly and said he believed nothing would change, and his firm confidence somewhat eased Lulanda's tension and gave her courage to move forward. In the middle of the walk, Gaes stepped forward and boldly told Lulanda that no matter how the world around them changed and whatever happened, she should not worry. The young beast boy swore that if Lulanda got into trouble, he would be the first to lend a shoulder and protect her. Hearing that sincere promise, Lulanda raised her head, opened her eyes wide and touched with emotion, and smiled to thank Gaes. Although she was still a little anxious about the approaching beast people guests, she silently prayed that it would not bring harm to the village, while the two children reached the meeting place. A tense scene unfolded. A strange young beast person with cat ears and light hair stood facing the dry land in a wary pose, and his anger was visible, was grinding his teeth at the sight of a human. Lulanda watched from afar, puzzled, wondering who this unfamiliar youth was and why he was so hostile. The unfamiliar beast person suddenly shouted, demanding an explanation of how a human could appear here at all and move freely, and from her aggression, Lulanda and Gaes jumped back in fear. Lan remained calm and gently replied that although she was human, she had never caused trouble or harm to the village, but her words only inflamed the youth even more, who waved her off and insisted that people could not be trusted. Len did not flinch and calmly accepted the painful truth. In her native country, extremists considered beastfolk wild animals. Without reason, these words struck the stranger and made him exclaim, "What?" Lan once again firmly said that she knew beastfolk were not like that, and she would never have done the cruel things those villains did, but her words only intensified the conflict between the races. She insisted that if she were that monster, the villagers would have long ago not allowed her to live among them, and the stranger coldly snorted and suspected that she was only flattering to later sell people into slavery. Suddenly his gaze froze. Behind Gaes stood the small figure of Lulanda, and not believing his eyes, he exclaimed, "Another human child." His shock was obvious when he realized that the village sheltered not one, but two humans. The rage of the strange young beastfolk burst forth in full force as he shouted at the villagers, demanding an explanation of how they could allow as many as two humans to live in the tribe, loudly reminding them of the crimes humans once committed against their people, and asking if they truly understood the danger lurking. Suddenly, Chief Otto stepped forward with a serious expression and firmly stated that he fully understood the young man's words, but emphasized that not all humans were so evil. Otto looked at Lulanda and Lan and loudly announced to the stranger that they were both now official and important members of the village, raising his hand authoritatively and demanding that the guest beastfolk, if they wanted to continue living nearby or maintain exchanges, open their hearts and accept that two humans live here. Hearing the chief's resolute decision, the stranger froze in shock, speechless, while Lul and the boatman anxiously watched the huge protection Uncle Otto showed. Feeling the tension, Lulanda gently took Gaea's hand and, wishing to get acquainted and get closer to that strange young beastfolk, gathered her courage, stepped forward, politely bowed, and said in a clear voice, "I am Lulanda, I hope for your help," and her innocent and sincere act stunned the stranger. He froze, puzzled, and did not know how to respond. After a moment of surprise, the young beastfolk quickly pulled himself together, became stern again and demanded that Otto's provide a satisfactory explanation for why these humans were here. Otto nodded understandingly and suggested everyone go to his home to sort out these complicated matters in more detail, then turned to Lulanda and Gaea and said that what would happen next was too troublesome for children, so it was better for them to go home first, and Gaea and Lulanda silently agreed, although their curiosity still burned. Lulanda intently watched Otto's retreating back and suddenly asked permission to join the conversation with everyone. Her unexpected request surprised Otto's. He exclaimed, "Huh." And Lulanda pressed her lips and sincerely said that she really wanted to learn the truth about the relations between humans and beastfolk. The girl with white hair dared to face the harshest truths to find the courage to protect those she loved, and ended the chapter with a powerful image of a child long considered helpless. In the house of the leader Otto, an important meeting gathered. Lan, Lulanda, and a group of strange beastfolk were present, and Otto was the first to speak, asking Lulanda and Lan what they knew about the tense relations between humans and beastfolk. Lulanda bowed her head and admitted that she knew nothing about it, while Lan thoughtfully replied that she only possessed information and views from the human world. Len began to tell the story from the human perspective. People told each other that the two races once lived together in peace until the beastfolk began to show their wild nature and repeatedly committed cruel acts. She explained that this was why humans decided to revolt, take the beastfolk under control, and tame them to maintain order. Lan's words angered the strange beastman. He slammed his palm on the table and stood up sharply, calling it a vile distortion. Lan hurried to explain that although many believe such things and profit from capturing slaves, there are also people like her who know. The truth is quite different. The young beastman, his eyes burning with hatred, began to speak the truth from his people's perspective. Once both sides coexisted as equals, but when humans gained power and formed nations, they began to hunt them and mercilessly enslave the beastfolk. After the defeat, the beastfolk tribes were forced to disband and flee into deep forests, hiding in small, hidden villages. His throat tightened at the memory of horror, how humans attacked his native village and mercilessly destroyed it. When Lulanda heard the word attack, she froze and asked anxiously, and the young man confirmed. Their village was destroyed, there was nowhere to return, they had to seek refuge here, and he said with pain that many of theirs were probably captured and subjected to cruel slavery. Lulanda, overwhelmed with horror, asked about the fate of those taken, and received only a bitter nod from the young man. He admitted that although he desperately wanted to save them, the rest of the survivors were too weak against the powerful human armies. The young beastman exploded with rage and shouted that he also wanted to help his brethren, but the truth was this: they could not overcome the human kingdoms, and everyone saw his helplessness and suffering. Lulanda recoiled in fear, pressing her hands to her chest in shock. Seeing her frightened, the young man suddenly stopped, softened his voice, and apologized for shouting in front of a child who still does not understand the world. Lulanda sadly bowed her head, and on behalf of her people sincerely apologized for the crimes committed by humans, but the beastman stopped her, and quietly said that she did not need to apologize, it was not her fault. He began to reveal an important detail. The attackers bore the coat of arms of the kingdom of Manga, and it turned out that the root of this tragedy was that the kingdom announced the discovery of a divine child. Beastfolk concluded that Manga was increasing the capture of beastfolk slaves to use them in military plans against other states that also have divine children, and when Lulanda suddenly trembled and gasped, as if recalling a terrible memory, Gaea anxiously asked if she was okay, but Lulanda only slightly shook her head and said that everything was fine. Otto said in a heavy voice that preparations must be made, because no one knows what other madness those who hold the divine children might commit, and loudly promised to open his arms and accept all refugees seeking shelter. Seeing the fatigue on the faces of the two children, Otto gently asked Lulanda and Gaes to rest earlier after a long, turbulent day, and a little later apologized for making them listen to such heavy stories. In the night silence, Lulanda came to Lana's room to talk. They sat opposite each other in a quiet wooden room, and on their faces was anxiety because of what they had just heard. Lulanda raised her eyes to Lana and sadly whispered that maybe she really was that divine child. Lana looked at her with tenderness and softly replied that whatever the outcome, she believed Lulanda had brought hope. Lulanda wondered if the beastfolk would suffer so severely without the divine child, clenched the hem of her dress, and sincerely said she was glad to have met everyone here, boldly declaring, "I love you all," as a promise of an unbreakable bond between her and the beastfolk village. In the silence of the room, Lulanda, bowing her head in uncertainty, whispered that she was just an ordinary person and feared that maybe she really was the divine child. Lana looked at her sternly but gently interrupted, saying that even if the appearance of the divine child caused all these events, the misfortunes that befell the beastfolk are a reality that always exists and can happen at any moment, regardless of any one child. Lana continued, The country where she once lived, Faratrof, had long had very bad relations with Miga, and she was sure that Miga would definitely continue hunting slaves, regardless of whether the divine child appeared. Lana urgently told Lulanda not to torment or blame herself, but the girl with white hair could not hold back tears, thinking about the sufferings that Nilshi and others had endured, and Lana carefully reached out to comfort her. Seeing the child's pain, Lana smiled warmly and trustingly, and assured her that everything would be fine. Lulanda raised her eyes, wide and full of hope, naively whispered, "Really?" And this assurance from the elder became a balm that gently healed her broken heart. Still doubting, she timidly asked if Lana would accept her even if she really was the divine child, to which Lana gently smiled instead of words. This touched Lulanda so much that she choked and gratefully whispered, "Thank you." Lana's understanding and compassion restored the girl's calm and trust, and when she calmed down, Lulanda looked Lana in the eyes and said she wanted to better understand what it means to be the divine child. Lana seriously listened to the request and began to explain that the divine child in this world is an extraordinarily special being, so their presence inevitably brings both light and dark, intertwined influences. Lana posed a difficult hypothetical question, asking Lulanda what she would do if in the future the beastfolk were threatened and enemies demanded to hand over the girl. Lulanda froze for a moment, then quietly nodded and admitted that if giving her up would save everyone, she was ready to sacrifice herself, and Lana silently looked at her selfless kindness with a worried gaze. Immediately, Lana coldly drenched that naive thought with reality and warned, even if Lulanda agrees to go, the other side may not keep their promise to help the beastfolk. She emphasized that these people not only might not help, but would use Lulanda's absence to harm and further cripple the peasants. This harsh, bitterly realistic explanation knocked out a stunned, incredulous exclamation from Lulanda. "That's how it is," Lan gently advised. "No one who truly loves her wants her to become a victim or give herself up for someone else." She reminded Lulanda that she is sincerely loved here and that what Otto's high and all the villagers dreamed most of all to live happily with her and laugh together every day. Lan firmly spoke the truth. Happiness that comes only from one side does not last, and someone's suffering for the peace of others will not make anyone truly happy. She seriously said this to Lulanda at the moment when the power of the divine child burst forth. The girl faced a harsh choice to live in the human world or stay with the beastfolk, and she would have to think over and make this decision of her own free will. Seeing the embarrassed Lulanda and hearing that it was too hard for her, Lenz gently smiled and agreed it is indeed not easy to cope alone. He took her small hands and persistently asked her to rely on and trust those who love and sincerely value her. Finally, Lan suggested ending the conversation and going to sleep, as it was already late. Lulan blossomed with a radiant smile and sincerely thanked Lan before ending a day full of reflections about the future. Lenset quietly combs Lulan's long hair while she, the blonde, stands with an empty gaze and gets lost in thoughts about being the divine child and all the tangled troubles surrounding her. Suddenly, Lan wondered if Lulanda's birthday was approaching. She knew that Lulanda and Alice were twins, and Lulanda thoughtfully replied that maybe yes, but no one had ever congratulated her or held celebrations in her honor. Lan blossomed with a smile and decisively declared that this time everyone would definitely celebrate the girl, after which she enthusiastically began braiding Lulanda's hair. But in the end, tangled the hair into such a messy tangle that both froze in amazement. Lan awkwardly apologized, saying she really wanted to braid nicely, but her clumsy hands ruined everything. And Lulanda just silently looked at her reflection in the mirror with a stunned expression. Seeing Lan's confusion, Lulanda smiled happily and reassured her. If Lan braided the braid, she was already very glad, but Lan jumped up and insisted that it could not be left like that. They must definitely ask Uncle Otto's to braid the hair properly. Lulanda's smile sparkled in the mirror. She gradually felt the warmth of a real family. After the meeting with the group of strange beastfolk in the village, tension prevailed. It did not subside due to prolonged disputes. Lulanda sat alone on the bed and realized that Nilshi and others still had not warmed up to her, and confusedly recalled sad past birthdays when she could only stand aside and watch her parents take care of her sister. In that painful memory, birthdays were exclusively for Alisa. The older sister was showered with countless gifts and parental affection. Little Lulanda could only stand pressed against the door, quietly watching their warm scene of three and not receiving a single question or caring glance. The girl with white hair once turned away and walked through the dark house, carrying unbearable loneliness after her own family pushed her away. Returning to the present, Lulan pressed her hand to her chest with admiration, and Shaylee wondered if a child like her truly deserved birthday wishes. At that moment, Lulan opened the door and went outside with a little griffin. When she went out, Lulanda was completely frozen with surprise. There stood Lan, Uncle Otto, Gaes, and the whole village with bright smiles, and all shouted in unison, "Happy birthday, Lulanda." Amidst the beautiful nature, this overwhelmed the white-haired girl and touched her with this unexpected warmth. Lan stepped forward with a radiant smile and said that as soon as she said it, everyone immediately gladly joined in celebrating this girl. Meanwhile, the strange beastman Nilshi stood aside with a stern look that seemed to soften a little, and suddenly Gaes blushed, came closer, and called Lulanda to attract her attention. Gaes smiled brightly and wholeheartedly congratulated his dear friend on her birthday. Everyone around saw the sincerity of him and those nearby. Lulanda could not hold back tears of happiness streaming from her eyes. Gasping between sobs, she whispered thank you, deeply moved, and when Gaes and Uncle Otto, worried, rushed to ask what had happened, she, wiping tears, quietly explained that she was crying only from happiness. Hearing this, Gaes sighed with relief and gently stroked her head. Thus ended the first birthday full of meaning and love in the new village. Gaes was a little confused seeing that Lulanda was still sobbing and awkwardly asked why she was crying even more, and Lulanda choked out that it was because of Nilshi and everyone who had been so kind to her. The girl smiled happily through tears and said that the wishes of goodness from everyone gave her a deep sense of fulfillment, and behind her, the strange young man Nilshi stood looking thoughtful and pensive. The birthday celebration was bustling in the valley. People, beastmen, and spirit beasts gathered at tables piled with food. Lulanda was surprised and lit up with joy when the beast girls gave her a pretty flower wreath, and the white horse Sifo, along with griffin friends, joyfully bustled around, sharing the little lady's happiness. Lan looked tenderly at Lulanda and quietly asked her to love everyone as she wished, because in truth everyone here loved her very much, and it was visible. Lulanda shone alongside Gaes, Uncle Otto, Lan, and the little griffin, a sacred family moment that erased all racial divisions. When night fell and the party quieted down, Gaes joyfully walked under the tree canopies together with Lulanda, exclaiming that today was a true day of joy, and noticed that Lulanda seemed confused and thoughtful. Gaes asked worriedly how she was, and the innocent Lulanda replied that everything went so wonderfully, like a dream. Then, to his surprise, she asked Gaes to pinch her cheek to check if it was real. He agreed and lightly pinched her, causing Lulanda to grimace in pain. He hurriedly apologized, but she smiled happily and said that this pain pleased her because it proved it was not a dream, and seeing her sweet reaction, Gaes lit up and promised that next year they would definitely celebrate her birthday like this again, and the emotional night ended with her gentle confidence. After the birthday filled with joy, Lulanda sat thoughtfully in the cramped room, a wreath still hanging on the wall as a memento. She rested her chin on her hand and smiled, thinking about the warm love she received. And although she was once abandoned, she slowly began to believe that she could truly take on responsibilities as a divine child among the beastfolk community. The next morning, Gaes' call to Lulanda broke the early silence. The girl with white hair nervously opened the door to meet her close friend. He smiled brightly and waved, greeting her with good morning. Then gently took Lulanda's hand and asked with interest what she planned to do that day. Gaes happily told her that soon everyone would be making jam, invited Lulanda to come and watch with him, and explained that it was usually made from wild fruits gathered deep in the forest. Lulanda's eyes widened with curiosity, but they didn't walk long. She suddenly stopped and became thoughtful, and Gaes anxiously asked if everything was all right. Lulanda looked up at her friend, her eyes shining, and quietly confessed that she was still savoring the sweet aftertaste of yesterday's birthday, and that she was extremely pleased to receive such warm attention every day. Then the scene shifted to a small kitchen, where the beastwoman was lively watching a bubbling pot of jam, helped by several tiny griffins. When Lulanda and Gaes approached the kitchen door, they were enveloped by a thick, tempting aroma. The beast-like woman cheerfully greeted the two children and invited them inside, and the smell of jam was simply irresistible. Lulanda and the little griffins couldn't help but jump with excitement, and the kind woman smiled and gently reminded the girl to be careful. The fire was very hot. Lulanda quietly inquired about the secret of such fragrant jam, and the beast woman, stirring the cauldron, explained that it was made by slowly stewing the fruits until soft and sweetening with pure honey. She added that they usually prepare a large batch to share with the whole village, which made Lulanda exclaim, "Oh," in surprise at their generosity. Lulanda's eyes shone with impatience. She hugged a little griffin and exclaimed that she couldn't wait to try the jam. The griffin chirped excitedly in agreement, and behind them someone stood watching. Gaes quietly smiled, pleased that Lulanda had finally settled in and found joy in simple village affairs. The beast-like woman took a small spoonful of jam and gently offered it to Lulanda. The white-haired girl shyly asked, "May I?" Opened her mouth, and when the gentle sweetness of the jam melted on her tongue, Lulanda's eyes lit up with delight, and she exclaimed that it was truly delicious. Hearing this, the woman eagerly asked the girl to take the freshly filled jars and distribute them to everyone in the village. Lulanda gladly agreed to the task and set off with a basket full of jars of jam, starting by giving one jar to a beastman working by the road. Then her gaze froze on the village elder Otto in the distance, who was standing and talking with a group, so she rushed and called out, "Uncle Otto, Otto turned around, smiled, and warmly accepted the jar from her, sincerely thanking her. He gently said that he would soon leave the village, set out on a journey to check what was happening beyond its borders, and Lulanda asked with curiosity, "Beyond the borders?" Otto said he wanted to inspect the surrounding forest due to recent troubling events involving the Nilshi group. He assured the girl that he would return by dusk, and Lulanda nodded slightly, though her heart still felt anxiety about what was happening beyond the forest. Noticing Lulanda's anxious look, the village head Otto smiled reassuringly and gently stroked her head, firmly telling her not to worry and to wait for the fragrant jam when he returned. His warm gesture dispelled her tension, and she trustingly replied, "Yes." Lulanda waved goodbye and wished Uncle Otto a safe journey as his tall figure headed toward the edge of the forest. She stood silently watching until the sturdy figure of the leader disappeared behind the dense canopy of the old forest, holding on to hope for a smooth, safe return. But night quickly fell on the village. And Otto still had not returned under the pale. Anxious Moon Gaia stood like a daisy, looking at the forest edge in eerie silence. Lulanda and the little griffin approached closer and quietly called his name, feeling that something was wrong. While in the distance, the village adults gathered and whispered tensely. With a face full of shock and fear, Guy trembled, saying that his father had not returned despite the promised time. He repeated his father's assurance that he would return by darkness, and Lulanda's heart clenched with anxiety. Nearby, an uncle from the Beastmen tried to calm everyone down. He said that Otto was a skilled man and everything would definitely be fine with him, so the two children should not worry too much. The uncle decisively told Gaes to go home and leave everything to the adults, but the young man strongly objected. He could not sit idly by while his father was in trouble. When other adults stopped and persuaded him, Gaes only fell silent and bowed his head, his eyes full of helplessness and pain over the difficult situation of the family. In the darkened air, the beastmen continued to discuss the search plan very tensely. Gaes quietly stepped away from the crowd and hugged a wild tree, his lonely back weighed down by anxiety. Lulanda watched him from afar with sad, worried eyes and felt how painfully her friend's heart was breaking. The village men felt that the matter was serious. Otto had not returned much longer than expected, so the next morning they decided to send a group into the forest to search for the whereabouts of the leader. Standing next to Lan and Gaes, Lulanda quietly, anxiously spoke the name of her friend's father, then turned and looked at Gaes with deep sympathy. Gaes turned away from Lulanda and quietly apologized that he could no longer speak, his voice trembling. He asked to be left alone, and Lulanda, seeing his shoulders shaking and him restraining an outburst, could only freeze. Her face was full of pity for her friend's pain. Feeling that the situation was bad, Lan came closer and gently took Lulanda's hand in the quiet night to calm her, and in a soft voice whispered that one could get sick in the cold. She suggested going inside and waiting for news. Lulanda quietly nodded in agreement, but her thoughts were fixed on the dark forest. The next morning, while she was still anxiously waiting, Lan ran in panic to the door and shouted the girl's name, and seeing his pale face, Lulanda hurriedly asked what had happened and heard the grim news. Gaes had not been seen since early morning, and this news widened the eyes of the white-haired girl in shock, as if warning of another trouble, because the boy had gone alone into danger to look for his father. Lan stood stunned and guessed that maybe Gaes had gone to look for Otto's, but Lulanda did not wait for an answer. She shot out like an arrow and rushed away, leaving Lan in surprise. She ran straight towards the old forest, not hearing the desperate cries behind her, because her little heart was burning with anxiety. Her feet did not stop, pounding on stones and roots. She called Gaes into the void, hoping to hear even the slightest response. Sweat poured down her cheeks, but she was not going to stop. In her mind there was only the image of her beast alone with hidden threats. Lulanda ran, looking around the dense thickets, and shouted, "Gaes, where are you?" Shock froze on her face when the forest answered only with eerie silence, and she plunged deeper into the dark thickets, determined to find her friend at any cost. After a long, continuous run, Lulanda's breathing became frequent and heavy from exhaustion. She stopped on the path, her eyes darting in all directions in search of even the slightest sign of Gaes, and around her was such silence that an undefined fear crept into her white-haired head, making her even more anxious and impatient. Suddenly, from afar, Lulanda noticed a familiar figure. Gaes was kneeling low on the ground in a clearing. She shone with joy, exhaled with relief, and loudly called him to make herself known. A bright smile just appeared on her lips at the thought that everything was fine, until Gaes turned to her pale with horror and shouted for her not to come closer. Lulanda's smile disappeared when she saw three armed figures in iron armor, with the emblem of the human kingdom, surrounding Gaes and pointing weapons at the frail beast boy. She froze in shock, her heart clenched as she realized her friend was in mortal danger. Without hesitation, Lulanda rushed forward and stood between Gaes and the soldiers, spreading her arms to shield him, shouting at them to say what they intended to do with Gaes, and in her gaze burned incredible determination and courage. This reckless act left Gaes behind, stunned and frightened for the safety of the white-haired girl. The human soldiers could not believe their eyes. A child, just like them, was defending a beast human. They demanded Lulanda hand over the item and threatened that if she refused, she was destined to suffer the same painful fate. Despite the threats and Gaia's advice to flee, Lulanda resolutely shouted, "Never." She chose to stand with her friends. Lulanda addressed the soldiers and declared in a resolute voice that she would not retreat an inch. The determination of the little girl began to test the soldiers' patience. Immediately, a rough-gloved hand grabbed Lulanda by her white braids, trying to tear her away, and she could only squeeze her eyes shut, preparing for the attack while Gaia's was helpless. A sharp whistle cut through the air as a powerful blade passed right between Lulanda and the soldier. This made him recoil in horror. The warriors looked at each other in shock, and Lulanda, confused after the sudden escape, heard a commanding voice asking what they were doing, and at that moment noticed the appearance of a formidable new figure. At a tense moment, a young man with a noble appearance appeared. The soldiers respectfully called him Prince. He looked at Lulanda, who was holding Gaia tightly, with surprise, and could not understand why a human child was protecting a beast person. The soldier explained that the girls seemed to be using some strange technique that stopped their actions. The prince listened, frowning, and looked at Lulanda with suspicion. Suddenly, a heart-wrenching scream of Lulanda echoed through the forest. Rhymer, the griffin mother, swooped down from above and found her little mistress, and Lulanda, filled with joy, called out her name. Rhymer exhaled with relief, finally finding Lulanda safe after searching every corner. The sudden appearance of a mythical creature like a griffin stunned the prince and his men, and taking advantage of their shock, Rhymer quickly grabbed Lulanda and Gaes, flapped her wings, and rose into the sky, leaving the group of kingdom people below helplessly watching their silhouettes recede. And once at a safe distance in the air, Lulanda quietly sighed with relief and whispered how lucky it was that Gaes was okay. The beast boy lowered his head in guilt and sincerely apologized for rashly chasing after his father and dragging Lulanda into danger. Lulanda gently told him not to worry. She understood his longing to see his father. Lulanda confessed she also really wanted to see Uncle Otto once more. At that moment, Rhymer, the griffin mother, announced something that stunned Lulanda. When Rhymer said she had found Otto, Lulanda's eyes lit up with joy, and she hurriedly asked where he was, and Gaia's eyes also lit up, and she asked Rhymer if she knew anything about his father. Lulanda's smile faded when she noticed Rhymer's sad, stern gaze. Seeing the eerie silence of her friends, Gaia anxiously asked what had happened and what the griffin had said, but Lulanda froze, her eyes wide with disbelief as if she had heard impossible news. Gaia urgently called Lulanda to snap her out of the stupor. The white-haired girl trembled. Her lips quivered as if she wanted to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. She bowed her head to the griffin mother's feathers and breathed quickly, and Gaia, not yet knowing the harsh truth that was about to be revealed, felt her fear growing. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Her voice sounded pained. Lulanda, through suffering, told Gaes that Uncle Otto was no longer in this world. This news struck like a deadly blow and completely stunned Gaes. Two children under the boundless sky faced the tragic truth and closed that chapter with a huge loss. In the oppressive night of the old forest, the campfire flickered, casting shadows on the backs of gathered beast people in mournful silence. Lulanda stood confused and looked into the dim flame with sad, empty eyes, and Gaia's lonely figure ahead made the pain of their loss even stronger. Funeral fires fiercely rose in the murky darkness to send the spirit of the village head Otto back to the earth. The entire beast people community stood in long rows, faces wet with tears and eyes full of farewell sorrow, and little Lulanda stood at the very end, eyes wide open, watching the fire consume the last warm memories of the kind leader. Gaia froze in place, watching the dying flames, his shoulders trembling as he held back unbearable grief. Lulanda approached but did not dare to speak. She knew words would not soothe such pain. At that moment, Lan quietly came up beside her and gently placed his hand on her shoulder, like silent comfort in the morning silence. With pain in her voice, Lan informed Lulanda that they had made a difficult decision. Everyone must leave the village immediately. She urgently urged Lulanda to pack quickly, explaining that recent events might have revealed the village's location to people. Surprised, Lulanda asked, why? Lan explained that to protect the entire community, they would have to look for a new home far from here. Lulanda raised her eyes, full of tears and pain, not understanding why Uncle Otto had to give his life so cruelly. Lan closed her eyes in sorrow and guessed that the knights were probably trying to torture him to find out the location of the village of beastmen. Otto stubbornly refused to utter a single word. Even when threatened with death, his brave act saved the lives of all present. Lulanda froze, realizing that Otto's silence had become a shield protecting the peace of the village and herself, and before her eyes, once again, flashed a warm but painful light smile of Otto beside Lulanda and Gaes, which made her value even more the noble sacrifice of the father of beasts. Lulanda, clutching the hem of her dress so tightly that her hands trembled, sobbed and hoarsely whispered that her heart was truly broken, and she did not want this sadness to last. Lan looked at her sympathetically and quietly replied, that she also hated this feeling of loss. Summoning all her courage, Lulanda looked Lana in the eyes and said she wanted to do something so that people would no longer have to endure such suffering and pain. Lulanda felt she had to act and promised to do everything in her power to help the group of settlers, although she knew the griffin gods could not carry the entire village and everyone would have to walk through the dense forest. The group gathered in a wooden hut under a flickering oil lamp. Lan and the rest decided, first to head south through the forest, where there were no human traces, to find a new beginning. The beastfolk set off on an exhausting trek through dense forests with their belongings on their backs. Lulanda grabbed a large folded blanket and walked resolutely alongside the griffins and calmer horses, glancing at Gaia's solitary back, walking ahead without looking back, carrying a vague anxiety for her friend drowned in sorrow. When the moon rose high and darkness fell, the group stopped to rest, and the werebeast announced that today they would stay here. He insisted that everyone set up camp and the adults take turns standing guard. Lulanda eagerly offered to help, but the man gently declined and asked her to go to sleep tonight. Forest was too dangerous, and she remained sad over her unfulfilled desire to be useful to the new family. Good Beastman patted Lulanda on the head and explained that, thanks to the gods of the griffins, she had made a pact to take turns on guard duty, so everyone could rest Chinese letter. He emphasized that moving south, as they are doing now, is very difficult. Her very presence and help were already precious and deeply appreciated. Lulanda listened to these words with sad eyes and quietly whispered a small yes. Lulanda tiptoed close to the sleeping griffins and quietly covered them with more blankets, gently smiling as she saw her beast friends resting after a hard day. But when she turned back, her gaze froze on the lonely figure of Gaia, who sat motionless among the dark trees in the distance, and she whispered his name anxiously in the silence. Seeing Gaes sitting confused and staring into emptiness, as if his spirit had flown away somewhere, Lulanda felt a vague fear that he might disappear again and rushed forward in panic. Out of breath from anxiety, she tried to call out, but the sound got stuck in her throat. Her eyes widened with fear, and trying to get closer to her friend, she gathered all her strength and shouted, "Gaes." That painful call echoed through the forest, frightening the beast boy, who sharply turned around, and a relieved smile flashed on Lulanda's face when she saw that he was still nearby. Confused Gaes, with a stunned look, whispered her name in response, and the tension melted into a touching meeting of two children under the gloomy night. Lulanda quietly sat next to Gaes at the foot of the old tree, and they plunged into the oppressive silence of the nomadic night. After a long time, Gaes bowed his head and painfully confirmed that his father had indeed died. The girl with white hair sitting nearby could only silently listen with wide-open sad eyes, feeling the pain piercing every word of her friend. With a face twisted in pain, Gaes, gasping, whispered painful questions. Why was his father killed so cruelly? He kept wondering if it was because they were beast people, not humans, that they had to endure such cruelty. Lulanda looked at Gaes with tears in her eyes and remained completely silent before those painful questions about the injustice and cruelty that humans had inflicted on his family. Unable to bear her friend's emotional breakdown, Lulanda suddenly stretched out her arms and hugged Gaes tightly. The warm, unexpected touch stunned Beast Boy for a moment. He only shouted her name in surprise, while Lulanda hid her face in his shoulder and tried to share the heavy sorrow he carried alone. She pressed him tighter and whispered that she felt his pain, gently explaining that when sad or anxious, strong hugs can soothe the heart. Feeling Lulanda's sincere care and the warmth spreading from her, Gaes closed his eyes, let the pain melt away, and quietly thanked his kind friend for staying by his side in his darkest hour. In the warm embrace of Lulanda, Guy could no longer hold back tears. They rolled down, his eyes clenched from pain, rage, and the immense loss of his beloved father, and the face of the boy beast trembled under the dim moonlight. Through sobs, Guy confessed that he still had so much to say and so much to do with his father, but now it was too late. Lulanda squeezed him tighter and quietly responded with a gentle of sympathy. Silently supporting her breaking friend, two children holding each other in the quiet old forest, where only Guy's sobs and the wind whistling through the dark canopy could be heard, and Lulanda closed her eyes. Let tears run down her cheeks, and felt the weight of pain pressing on their small shoulders in that long, uncertain night of the journey. After some time, when she had calmed down a bit, Lulanda let go and with a worried face looked straight at Guy and shyly said that she had an important confession and was afraid of what would happen when he heard it. Gaius could hate her, but he smiled gently and sincerely, encouraged her to speak, and assured her that he would never hate her. Lulanda began to recount the story of the divine child that Nilshi had told her, how the kingdom of Mega attacked their village simply because this child appeared. She bowed her head and looked at her hands. Her throat tightened as she prepared to say the most terrible thing that had tormented her thoughts all this time. With a trembling voice, Lulanda bravely declared that perhaps she herself really was that divine child, and added a convincing detail, supposedly when she was in the forest. Human soldiers could not touch her body, some strange force protected her. Hearing this, Guy froze, his eyes widened in shock as he pieced together the picture of those strange events in his mind. Lulanda painfully acknowledged Lenda's words. Because she was the divine child, all the troubles had fallen upon the beast people's village. She grabbed her hem and, sobbing, apologized to Guy, because she was sure that her very existence had indirectly caused the death of Uncle Otto. This torment broke the white-haired girl's heart and flooded it with unbearable remorse. After a pause to digest the news, Guy looked at Lulanda with a serious gaze and admitted that he did not fully understand what a divine child was and all these complex political intrigues. He admitted that perhaps it was that divine child who made Manga attack the village or push the people to flee, but looking at his crying friend, his eyes filled with determination. Suddenly, Guy loudly exclaimed that it was precisely because of Lulanda's strange power that he had escaped from those cruel soldiers. He resolutely told Lulanda that the real villains are the people who attacked his father, and that it was not her fault at all. Gaea's resolute statement drove the darkness from Lulanda's heart. Gaea gently stroked Lulanda's head and promised that even if she really was a divine child, he would always be her friend and never hate her. Lulanda was deeply moved, quietly thanked him, and decided that if she really had the power of a divine child, she would use it to protect everyone so that no one would have to experience such painful loss again. Guy thoughtfully said that since his father was killed, he had thought a lot and sought to put an end to such tragedies, insisting that it did not matter whether someone was a beast person or a human. Most of all, he wanted no one to have to endure the pain of losing loved ones that he himself had experienced. Lulanda listened to his mature reasoning with wide, compassionate eyes. With a determined but slightly self-ironic expression, Guy admitted that his dream might be unrealistic and too big for a child. He bowed his head and smiled to himself, calling it just fantasies, but Lulanda's eyes still did not take their gaze off every one of his movements. Immediately, Lulanda moved closer and firmly stated that it was not a whim at all, but a wonderful idea. Lulanda said enthusiastically that Gaea had always thought about the future, while she herself only sought to become stronger to protect others, and Lulanda's sincere encouragement somewhat surprised and embarrassed Gaea. Suddenly Lulanda jumped up, spread her arms in the night forest, and exclaimed with delight that she also wanted to create a place together with Gaea where everyone would live happily and always with a smile. Let's build it together. And Gaea remained sitting below, looking up impressed and seemingly stunned by her fiery determination. Seeing his embarrassed look, Lulanda tilted her head and asked if Guy really thought she would not cope, then pressed her hands to her chest, and once again firmly stated that although it would be very difficult, with Gaea by her side they would definitely manage, and her unwavering faith gave him strength and melted the heart of the beast boy, frozen by grief. Gaeus looked at Lulanda with a gentle smile and nodded, then reached out his hand and asked her to give hers. The white-haired girl blinked in confusion my hand, and shyly obeyed. Guy took her small hand and gently curled her fingers into a fist, preparing for a special ritual of their beast tribe. He explained that his father taught him, when two beasts want to make an equal vow and undertake something important together, they touch fists like this. Lulanda, surprised, exclaimed, "A vow," received his affirmative nod, and Guy's eyes burned with determination as he said that this was the moment to promise a better future together. Two children gently tapped their fists in the deep silence of the old forest. Gaeus looked into Lulanda's eyes and quietly but resolutely swore that he would create the peaceful refuge he had spoken of. It was a firm promise not only to Lulanda, but also an oath of honor before the soul of his late father. Lulanda's flared up, and she exclaimed that she would build that place together with Gaia's, where no one would be killed or torn apart like Uncle Otto. The two children unanimously declared their shared goal with incredible determination, driving away the gloom of their exhausting journey. When their conversation ended, Lulanda raised her eyes to the starry sky and decided to become stronger to have the strength to protect those most important to her. Her cry, "I will become strong," echoed in the mountains as an impressive sign of her maturity, ending the long night with an iron oath under the clear moon over the distant mountains. Leaving the village long called home and passing through the forest, Lulanda's group suddenly froze before a huge spectacle. Before them stretched a wide lake sparkling in the sun. Gaeus exclaimed in surprise, "This lake," and Lulanda's wide eyes shone with admiration. She was seeing such a vast body of water for the first time. Unable to contain her excitement, Lulanda exclaimed that she was seeing such a large lake for the first time. Lan, standing nearby, pondered she had expected the landscape beyond the forest to be different. But the lake seemed to stretch into infinity, and beneath the surface, fishtails gently splashed, casting ripples across the water. The two children joyfully pointed and shouted loudly, seeing fish swimming in the water, and nearby, a beastman smiled and noted that with such an abundance of fish, they would not have to worry about food. But seeing the villagers exhausted after a long, continuous march, he ordered everyone to stop and turn this place into a temporary camp. Lulanda and Lan went together to gather fruit nearby and saw baskets full of ripe red apples. Lan smiled and said they were lucky to find fresh fruit. Lan reminded Lulanda that after returning, everyone would start preparing dinner, but as they walked, she suddenly froze. Something ahead seemed strange to her, and Lulanda anxiously asked what had happened. They approached together and were stunned to see a pile of firewood in the middle of the path, charred to coal. Lan was sure it was the trace of a recently kindled bonfire. The most noticeable thing was that none of them were lighting this fire, so the thought arose that someone else lives or hides in this forest. Lulanda fell silent, staring into the ashes with a worried, frightened look. Lend carefully considered everything and told Lulanda that at least these people were not from Faratrof or Miga, because both kingdoms considered this land unexplored and there were no traces of theirs here. Interested, Lulanda asked who then could live here. Lan could only sigh. She could not imagine who it might be, and silently prayed that it would not become a threat to their group. Shortly after their return to the base, Lulanda sits on the grass by the lake shore next to a dozing young griffin, her face thoughtful and a little sad. Suddenly the young griffin sharply woke up and let out a cry, then happily pressed its head against Lulanda. Enchanted by the little companion, the girls quietly smiled and for a moment felt peace, looking at the quiet lake in the distance. On the shore, Guy, who was walking next to the beast-like woman, suddenly stopped and asked where Lulanda had gone, and the woman replied that she had seen her still down there with the god griffin. As soon as Guy saw Lulanda sitting alone, he suddenly noticed a dark figure lurking behind her. He turned pale and shouted, "Lulanda," to warn her and make her immediately look back. Hearing his frightened scream, Lulanda turned around in panic and saw the young griffin bristling and crying out anxiously. Instantly, a group of mysterious people with long pointed ears emerged from the darkness and surrounded them, and the silhouette of the leader was cold and majestic in the dim light. Lulanda caught her breath and trembled standing before these unfamiliar beings. Lulanda froze in shock, looking at the strangers with long ears, and the leader of the group squinted, looked closely at the girl, and quietly said that it turned out to be a human child. The tension in the air sharply increased. Both sides were wary of each other. At that moment from afar, Guy was running madly towards Lulanda, loudly calling her name, desperate to come to her aid. Gaia rushed forward and stood between Lulanda and the strangers to protect her, watching the group with long ears intently and realizing that they were even hostile towards the beast people. The elf leader stepped forward with pride and a voice that thundered, declaring this land his own, the land where elves had lived since ancient times, and coldly demanded from Lulanda's group an explanation of why the beast people and humans dared to step here. Noticing the tense atmosphere, the old beastman stepped forward to explain what was happening. In a firm voice, he assured that they were merely refugees who had lost their home and had not come here with bad intentions. The leader of the elves listened silently, frowning sternly, then snorted and agreed. If the Lulanda group was only temporarily seeking shelter near the lake, it could be considered, but warned that at the slightest problem they would be forced to leave immediately. After a minute of hesitation, the elf chief unexpectedly extended his hand as a gesture of goodwill and invited the beastmen to his village. To rest, the sudden invitation left Lulanda, Gaes, and Len stunned and speechless, as they believed the elves were aloof. Lan thought to herself that when they walked through the forest, she had seen no signs of an elven village, and Lulanda, still shocked by the death of the innocent, wondered if the village could really be so close. The beastmen barely smiled and replied that they needed time to thoroughly discuss it with everyone in the group before making a decision. The elf leader nodded in agreement and announced that they would return the next day at the same time for an answer, and when night fell near the migrants' campfire. Nilshi thought aloud, asking everyone if it was wise to go with the elves, who were known for their hostility to outsiders and secrecy. By the flickering fire, Nilshi admitted that he was not sure if the elves could be trusted, but the truth was that fleeing from the royal army, they had almost no better options. It occurred to him, if they continued to wander without a permanent shelter, someone would inevitably collapse powerless deep in the forest, so Nilshi insisted that going to the elves' village was the best option to at least temporarily save the tribe's lives. The old beast woman with a gentle face agreed with Nilshi and advised the group to stop wandering aimlessly, find some reliable place, and rest to regain strength. She believed that although the elves might be distant, they were not necessarily heartless or evil. Nilshi still could not calm down and pressed the old woman. If this invitation was really a conspiracy or a cunning plan of the elves, what would they do then? The old beast woman smiled gently and assured that if the elves truly wanted to accept them, then it was not a bad sign at all. She felt that this was most likely a fortunate turn and urged everyone to trust the goodwill of others. Meanwhile, Lulanda sat next to him with a worried expression and quietly asked Gaes if they could really become friends and live peacefully with the elves. Gaes thoughtfully looked at his friend and replied that he himself was not sure. He did not know if others also desired this. Hearing this, Lulanda sadly bowed her head and whispered, "Really?" Then Lan stepped forward and said that he sincerely understood Lulan's desire to make friends. But she also reminded them of a painful truth. Throughout history, there had been many deep conflicts and hatred between humans and elves. Lend quietly revealed the harsh truth. Once in the kingdom of Fairtroth, although there were few elves, humans hunted them and enslaved them. She wondered why the elves here themselves invited them into the village, and insisted that this did not mean they were allies of the beastfolk. So Lan advised Luland to be moderately cautious, and she only nodded slightly and sighed sadly. Seeing Luland's downcast face, Lan smiled warmly at her to encourage her and said that although it was difficult, they should still try to get along with the elves. Luland raised her eyes, shining with clear hope, and with such sweet determination sincerely admitted how much she wanted to befriend them. Gaia also blossomed with a bright smile and loudly exclaimed, "Yes." So the conversation ended with the two children united in hope for a brighter future. Having agreed together to try to adapt to the new environment, Luland and Gaia firmly shook hands, full of determination. Both beamed with smiles and promised to do everything possible to befriend the elves, putting aside their initial fears as they prepared to enter the mysterious village. The next morning, accompanied by elves, the entire group of beastfolk moved deeper into the ancient forest, and Lulanda tightly held a large rolled-up blanket and walked alongside Lan. The girl looked with curiosity at the back of their elf guide, her face shining with eager anticipation and trembling slightly with excitement about what awaited them. Noticing that the chief elf occasionally cast serious glances at her, Luland responded with a bright, friendly smile, but the elf only slightly closed his eyes and turned away, leaving her a bit disappointed and awkward. The young griffin nearby, as if sensing the tension, began making soothing sounds, and Luland thought to herself that perhaps she was not yet fully trusted. She looked up at Lan and anxiously asked what she should do for people to understand that she was not scary, and Lan paused for a moment, then gently replied that it was a difficult matter and would take time. She advised Luland that once they reached the village, they would slowly look for ways to approach the people, and at that moment the elf guide suddenly stopped and announced that they had arrived. Lulanda could not hold back an "oh" when she saw the small wooden houses skillfully built on the branches of massive ancient trees. Lan was frozen with amazement. The elves built their homes harmoniously, without cutting down the forest, and she admired that they seemed to live by the breath of the forest itself, creating an extraordinarily calm and poetic space. When the group entered the very heart of the village, an elf elder with a long beard and majestic posture stepped forward and asked who was the leader of this pack of werebeasts. Nilshi stepped forward and confirmed his identity. The elder nodded thoughtfully and asked again why they had lost their former home, and Nilshi answered firmly, confirming what the elven patrol had reported, after which the elder fell into quiet contemplation. After a minute of silence, the elf elder declared in a firm voice that they would allow the werebeasts to temporarily settle here to rest. He emphasized that the elves would officially welcome them on behalf of the spirit tree, and the entire group of werebeasts burst into joyful cries, while Lulanda, embarrassed, looked at the ground and asked what this spirit tree really meant. Lam began to explain to Lulanda that according to legend, the spirit tree is an ancient great tree that gave birth to the spirits of the world, and she told what she had read in an old diary about how the spirits ignited living seeds near it, then took flight and scattered across the world. So the oath sworn in the name of the spirit tree holds incredible sacred weight for the elves. It cannot be broken. Lan looked at the elder's staff and said firmly, since they loudly shouted, "Welcome," it means the elves really intended to help. Worry still flickered on Lan's face, so Lulanda anxiously asked why she was so worried. Lan gently shook her head and admitted that although the oath was genuine, the elves' attitude was still full of surprises. The earth spoke solemnly, warning Lulanda that since it is impossible to predict how events will unfold, the girl must be careful, and Lulanda quietly nodded and whispered softly, "Yes." Meanwhile, the elf elder announced that the village tour would begin the next day, and for now they would live together with the elves in a shared space. The first meeting ended formally, but a mystery still lingered in the air. As the group walked under the ancient tree canopies, Lulanda suddenly noticed a faint silhouette of a little girl hovering in the air right behind the elven guide. The girl with white hair froze and rubbed her eyes several times to make sure she was not imagining it, but the figure seemed to disappear the moment she blinked. Feeling something strange, Lan turned around and gently asked Lulanda if everything was all right, and she shook her head with a naive expression and replied that it was nothing, probably she was just tired, and it seemed to her. But her eyes still occasionally glanced into the deep shadow of the forest, burning with uncontrollable curiosity about that fleeting figure. Next morning in the elf village, the morning light seeped through the window of a small wooden house where Lulanda and Lan lived. Lulanda yawned sleepily as she woke up, and Lan was still sound asleep when an elf woman with a cold expression entered the room, pulled back the curtain, and sternly announced that it was time for everyone to have breakfast. The elf woman sternly told the two that to get used to things quickly, they would first have to go with her, and demanded that after eating they set off immediately so she could start leading the tour of the village. Len noticed that breakfast consisted entirely of unfamiliar green vegetables and explained to Lulanda that elves had long been vegetarians, so their preferences might differ from what the beastfolk ate. Lulanda quietly confessed to Lan that she was sad, although she asked the name of that woman. The elf refused to answer, and Lan, pondering, suggested that perhaps in elf customs it was simply not customary to use personal names, or simply to believe that hosting a guest does not yet mean forming close relationships, and this made Lulu Desi feel that true integration would be very difficult. Len smiled reassuringly and said that elves probably also had their own sorrows that explained their behavior. After breakfast, Luland shyly asked the elf woman if she could later visit other friends among the beastfolk. The cold woman replied that after the village tour she would take them there, and Lulanda sighed with relief. The three walked under thick foliage to an impressive structure, majestically towering on the trunk of a giant tree, and Lan enthusiastically wondered if it was a temple. The elf woman explained that this was the place where they prayed to the spirits, and firmly assured that the elves would never force Lulanda's group to perform their religious rites. Lan whispered that the elves really had a close connection with the ancient forest spirits. The elf woman closed her eyes in agreement and urged them to hurry to the beastfolk dwellings, and soon they found themselves near another wooden house hidden behind bushes. Gaia shouted excitedly upon seeing how Lulanda and the dry land were approaching, and in the otherwise quiet elven village, a rare, warm atmosphere suddenly prevailed. Nils kindly asked Gaia if he had rested well last night. The young beastman nodded and said that today he was shown the village. Nilshi smiled and said that it was good that the elves here were kind to everyone, and he felt relief seeing how new life was beginning to settle. Suddenly Lulanda turned and asked Gaes if he knew the names of any elves here. Gaes wavered and admitted that since arrival he had not learned a single name. Lulanda recalled Lana's words that although the elves were friendly, they were not ready to truly get close, and a thoughtful silence fell around. Suddenly a small griffin screamed in fear, frightening Lulanda. She felt a strange, mysterious surge of magic in the air, and Gaes added that he himself barely felt magic, so probably only Lulanda noticed it. He seriously warned her to be very careful. This energy seemed not to come from ordinary elves. Lulanda tried with all her might to feel that magic, but in the end shook her head, admitted that she still did not understand its nature. Gaia sighed anxiously, and Lulanda clenched her hands in determination and firmly declared that she and Lana would thoroughly investigate this mysterious energy to protect the traveling group. Returning to the wooden house, Lulanda shuddered because she noticed that nearby an elf woman was still watching her every move with a cold, piercing gaze. Although the girl smiled politely and said thank you, the woman remained with a stone expression, causing Lulanda to fall silent, and the air became tense and stuffy. Lulanda, agitated, suddenly froze, feeling a strange presence right near the house. She wondered who or what was hiding there, despite Lana's attempts to stop her. Lulanda decisively flew out onto the balcony to check, leaving behind the ground, confused and feverishly calling her name. From the balcony, Lulanda, stunned, looked down and met the gaze of an elven elder who silently stood below. She realized that the strange magic earlier seemed to come from him, but was distorted and completely unlike the usual, so the elder coldly raised his eyes and shouted, "Hey girl," ordering Lulanda to immediately come down to him. Lulanda obediently descended the wooden ladder and approached the elder. While Lana watched anxiously, he rushed after her and, pressing on the girl, asked where she was going. The elder cast an unfriendly look at Lana and said in a quiet voice that he had called only Lulanda and had not invited her to join. Faced with the elder's stern attitude, Lana boldly stepped forward, stood between Lulanda and him, and loudly declared that she would never allow the child to go alone with a stranger. The elder looked at Lana for a moment, coldly snorted, said fine, turned his back, and silently gestured for them to follow him. When the elder led them away from the peasants' houses, Lan anxiously asked where he intended to take them. The elder coldly replied that they should remain silent and just follow. Lulanda walked in silence, her heart pounding with fear, but when Lan placed his hand on her shoulder, that warm touch calmed her a little in the gloomy ancient forest. Lan gently placed her hand on Lulanda's shoulder and firmly said not to worry, would always be there to protect her. The girl with white hair sighed with relief and sincerely thanked Lan, but then Lulanda's eyes suddenly clouded. Her body spun. Lend cried out in horror. Lulanda unexpectedly fell to the ground, leaving her companion in complete shock. Lan panicked, rushed to catch her, and screamed, asking what happened, but the girl had already fallen into a coma. Her face was pale and covered in sweat. The elder of the elves stood silently in the distance, like a ghost in the dim forest light, and his grim silhouette cast a shadow of ominous foreboding over their safety. Soon Lulanda slowly opened her eyes and looked around the wooden room wrapped in massive tree roots, and was shocked. This was definitely not the house of that elf where she had stayed. Lulanda rose anxiously and shouted the name Lenda, but only terrible silence answered, and the girl's heart tightened with fear that gripped her little head. The wooden door suddenly creaked open dryly, and the elder of the elves entered. He asked coldly if the girl had regained consciousness, and Lulanda raised her gaze with wide, frightened eyes and hurriedly asked where Lan was. The elder quietly said that the human woman was being held in another place, and Lulanda froze in shock from the sudden separation. The elder of the elves squeezed the staff, and suddenly exclaimed that he understood Lulanda sees spirits, and this so surprised the girl that she blurted out, "Spirits." He passed by her with a mysterious look, and Lulanda remained confused by that secret energy he spoke of. The elder assured that, although Lulanda does not see them with ordinary sight, she definitely feels how the spirit's magic spreads around. Lulanda recalled that strange breeze she had felt earlier and wondered how he knew that. Then she gathered her courage, looked him straight in the eyes, and naively asked if he really hated people. The elf elder disdainfully declared that humans are inferior creatures, will never be able to feel the grace of the spirit, and constantly try to enslave elves, loudly adding that even the beastfolk traveling with Lulanda are merely creatures with the blood of wild predators. However, he lowered his voice and said that Lulanda has a special power, so he cannot treat her as he pleases, and this made her think about what awaits those who do not have such abilities. The atmosphere suddenly darkened, and the elf elder loudly pronounced a word that sent a chill down Lulanda's spine: sacrifice. This cruel statement struck her like lightning. The white-haired girl froze, her eyes wide with horror, because she felt how beneath the village's calm mask a dark, bloody plan was growing. The elf elder coldly explained that the only reason they agreed to accept humans and beastfolk was to turn them into sacrifices, insisting that those inferior creatures at least serve as substitutes for elves and their rights. Lulanda exclaimed in shock, "Substitutes," and desperately wanted to find out to whom or why they were going to sacrifice everyone to justify such cruelty. The elder fixed his gaze on the thorny, twisting vines and announced that the designated sacrifice must be a fierce, dark beast. He explained that it is an intelligent creature, similar to a griffin or a celestial horse, which the group of Lulanda had brought. Hearing this, the white-haired girls screamed in panic, protesting that such a thing could not be done, and begged everyone to flee together. But the elder waved them off and firmly said that once someone steps here, no one will escape anymore. The elf elder spoke about the spirit tree. They say it gives birth to spirits and nurtures their highest shoots, but then he revealed a terrible truth, right beneath that ancient trunk. In the darkness dwelled a fierce black beast, ready at any moment to harm the tree. This dreadful creature even devoured small spirits, and Lulanda froze in horror at this. He continued, persistently explaining, if the elves refuse to make sacrifices, the dark beast will devour the newborn souls of the spirits, even those who have made a pact with them. Hearing this, Lulanda trembled and asked to confirm whether the elder really intended to use the lives of all the beastfolk tribe as food for that monster. He coldly replied with one word: yes. The elder decisively stated that sacrificing the beastfolk tribe was the only way to protect the tree of spirits and save the elves. But Lulanda firmly objected and shouted that she categorically refused to sacrifice everyone for such a cruel purpose. Lulanda loudly declared that since she met the elves, she dreamed that they would live together in harmony and become friends. She believed that the elves' skills and the beastfolk's strength together with spirit beasts like Sappho and Griffin would create an unparalleled power that no race alone could achieve. But the elven elder looked at her skeptically and insisted that she specifically explain what she meant, and Lulanda, spreading her arms, boldly proposed instead of sacrificing them to unite all together and defeat the dark beast. This proposal stunned the elder, and he exclaimed that such a small person as she could never oppose a creature that even mighty elves could not defeat. She was met with skepticism, but Lulanda stood her ground and honestly admitted that she had no concrete evidence or grounds. She resolutely said that if they did not try, they would never know how it would end. If the sacrifices continued, the circle of misfortunes would never close. Lulanda, with absolute faith in the power of unity, fervently begged the elder to fight side by side with them. Suddenly, a shining stream of spirit light flickered around the elder. He froze speechless, looked at Lulanda in disbelief, and could not believe his eyes. The elder pondered and realized that the spirits seemed to be on the side of the blonde girl and were trying to send him a message. Although he could not understand everything, he felt that the spirits showed unprecedented care for Lulanda, so he finally yielded and announced that he would agree to her plan, believing it was the will of higher powers. Lulanda blossomed with joy and quietly whispered her approval. The elder assured that the elves listened to the spirits, and soon Lulanda fell with relief, thinking that finally everything was starting to get better. The elven elder looked at her a little softer, then with wind magic gently lifted Lulanda into the air. She blossomed with wonder and admiration at the strange spell. He announced that he would take her to the beastfolk settlement, and Lulanda beamed with a smile and quietly decided that their current goal was for elves and beastfolk to unite and win together. As soon as Lulanda returned home, Lan rushed to her in panic, hugged her tightly, and exclaimed with relief how glad he was to see her safe. Meanwhile, the people of Gae and other beastfolk gathered around, their faces filled with anxiety over the girl's sudden disappearance. The mood became serious when the elven elder quietly appeared behind them and asked everyone to sit and listen so he could explain everything. Lend, with ash on his face and in complete shock, whispered, "Sacrifice," and the beastfolk trembled with anger and outrage over the elves' cruel plan. Nilshi instantly stepped forward and loudly asked if the fact that the elder raised this issue meant that he had decided to abandon the sacrifice plan. The elven elder closed his eyes, pondered, and then nodded, confirming that this was the case. The elder looked at Lulanda and explained that instead of blindly following the spirit's prophecy, he had spoken alone with the girl herself. Lulanda, with eyes shining with determination, stepped forward and said before Gaia and everyone that she wanted all races to unite and defeat the dark beast threatening the village, instead of sacrificing someone. Lulanda spread her arms and declared her burning desire. It did not matter whether you were a beastman, a human, or an elf. What she truly wanted was to create a place where everyone would live in safety and always wear a joyful smile. She looked directly at Gaia and recalled the oath they had made under the moon. The young beastman was stunned, and Muvadha was struck by the noble spirit of his friend. The old beastman bowed his head in thought and said that this would indeed be very difficult to achieve, and Lulanda, confused, watched him go as the wooden room sank into a deep, anxious silence. As if the harsh truth about the power of the dark beast still stood as an insurmountable wall in the adult's thoughts. But the beastman suddenly stepped forward and gently placed his hand on Lulanda's head to calm her. He barely smiled and quietly said that although it was difficult, it was truly a beautiful dream. This warm gesture lifted the spirit of the white-haired girl and somewhat eased the tension at the meeting. The beastman said firmly that although he could not forgive the elves for planning to use them as sacrifices, the real disaster had not yet come. Moreover, the beastmen were grateful to the elves for providing them shelter in their hour of need, so he resolutely told the elder, if it was within their power, the beastmen would gladly join the fight. In response to this goodwill, the beastmen set a firm condition. If they together defeated the dark beast, the elves must finally recognize them as independent, worthy individuals, and not treat them as second-class beastmen or humans. The elder of the elves silently watched as the others filled with determination, and finally nodded in agreement, but reminded that this would only happen if they truly defeated the monster. In the large wooden hall under dim lamps, representatives of all races gathered to begin a serious tactical conversation. The elven elder spoke in a grim voice that the dark monster had lived under the spirit tree for about 7 years. Since then, it demanded one human life in exchange for peace each time. He admitted that the elves did not surrender quietly, they put all their magic into resistance, but suffered devastating defeats. In the elder's story emerged a figure black as pitch with thorny tentacles, like an obsessive nightmare that could not be destroyed, and he revealed an even more terrible detail. The beast was not just deadly, but intelligent and even offered a deal if given sacrifices, it would not touch the spirits. Lan guessed that it was some kind of monster capable of psychic connection, and pressed the elder, demanding the truth about the nature of the creature that even mighty elven magic could not reach. The elven elder quietly explained that the beast absorbs magic to survive even under the blows of elven spells. It remained unharmed and quickly restored damaged parts of its body. He feared that all creatures with magic near the spirit tree risked becoming its food, and the werewolves froze in horror, not knowing how to kill a creature immune to magic. To settle the situation, the werewolf suggested that they mutually test their strengths and skills and devise an effective joint strategy. He added that the werewolves had hunting experience, but were not sure if physical weapons would work on the monster. He asked the elven elder to tell about the types of magic of his people, so the werewolves could find a way to help. The elder closed his eyes for a moment and agreed to share all he knew. In the silence of the kitchen, Lan sat staring into a cup of tea and admitted that she could not calm her thoughts because of the looming burden. Seeing this, the elf woman approached and comforted her it was not yet time to panic. The date of the sacrifice was still a bit distant, and she hoped they would find a way to get rid of this creature before that fatal moment. Lan wondered why such a powerful creature demanded only an annual sacrifice after all. If it were truly incredibly strong, it could swallow the entire village with one bite. The elven elder replied that perhaps the monster enjoyed their prolonged suffering and fear, which is why it remained calm after each offering. Lulanda quietly stood next to Lan, and the woman, busy washing the dishes, had heavy thoughts on her face about the nature of the enemy. Lan whispered whether the beast was seeking only amusement, or if behind its strange intelligence there was some other hidden purpose. Noticing Lan's anxiety, the girl with white hair softly called her by name to dispel the gloomy atmosphere. Lulanda looked straight into Lan's eyes, her gaze shining with determination, and she loudly said that she also wanted to fight alongside everyone. She promised to train her magic more persistently to be useful, and confessed that she no longer wanted to see anyone else disappear while she helplessly stood aside. Lan gently smiled and said she shared Lulinda's desire, but directly warned that inexperienced ones like them could become a burden in battle. The white-haired girl asked Lan, a little embarrassed, what they should do, and Lan quickly gathered herself and suggested going to find the beastman leader to negotiate how they could help from the rear. Lan smiled radiantly and assured that there would definitely be tasks that both of them could do to help achieve a common victory. Lulanda joyfully exclaimed, "Yes," and the scene behind the wooden house changed. Preparations for battle were urgently unfolding there. Stern Beastman firmly told Lulanda that under no circumstances would he allow her to approach the dark beast closely, and resolutely stated that direct attacks were the business of healthy adults, but noticing her disappointed expression, he smiled and said that instead he had another extremely important task in which she was needed. Lulanda asked in surprise, "Medicine?" When she saw the apothecary Zeshi preparing instruments, Zeshi explained that in the upcoming battle, many people would surely be wounded, so healing potions needed to be prepared, and asked those not going to the front line and children to help mix medicines and gather herbs. This captivated Lulanda. She pressed the woven basket to herself and immediately agreed. Apothecary Zeshi gently smiled and told Lulanda that battle was not only about rushing into attack, there were other ways to protect people from the rear, such as logistics and medical support. Lulanda listened carefully and closely watched the backs of Gaia and other young beastmen who were preparing in the distance, resolutely deciding to do her task well. Preparation was in full swing. The elf elder was performing powerful rituals to strengthen the defense, and Lulanda diligently sat next to an old beastwoman, studying various herbs. She and Lan carefully sorted and packed every valuable remedy, hoping they would help the warriors, and before night fell, a rare atmosphere of unity prevailed among the races. When the time to destroy the dark beast was approaching, Gaia and Lulanda quietly sat under a huge tree, catching the last sip of peace. Gaia thought that everything was about to begin, and Lulanda raised her eyes to the starry sky and resolutely said to her friend, "We must give everything in this life-and-death battle." Lulanda quietly confessed that she dreamed of a solution where no one would die, and Guy bowed his head and admitted that the thought of fighting such a fierce beast, which even the elves could not defeat, scared him. Anxiety was clearly read on the faces of the two children in the silence of the old forest. Suddenly Guyas jumped to his feet with burning determination and shouted that despite the fear, they must win. He emphasized that if they lose this trial, their dream of a peaceful home will disappear forever. The resolute words of Gaia acted like a sip of strength, encouraging the silver-haired girl standing behind his back. Lulanda quietly smiled, watching how friends steadfastly stood behind him, and felt how Guyos had matured after the death of his father. The next morning, the entire village of beast people and elves gathered together, ready to set off to the Tree of Spirits in a solemn, extremely tense atmosphere. On the way, Gaia suddenly grabbed Lulanda's small hand. She hesitated for a moment, surprised and embarrassed. The young beast boy smiled gently to calm her, and they moved on resolutely. Then the elders of the elves stopped near a densely overgrown fork in the path and announced in a quiet voice that they had arrived at the place. Lulanda froze and whispered, "Is this the Tree of Spirits?" seeing soft light spreading ahead. Before them stretched a space filled with spiritual energy, and the girl could not help but admire the pure, sacred beauty of the ancient giant tree, which was the soul of the elves. However, the beauty of the tree spirit was instantly enveloped in darkness when black roots tightly wrapped around its base. The elf elder solemnly ordered Lulanda not to come closer, pointed to the deep darkness beneath the tree, and said that what was hiding there was their enemy, with whom they would have to fight. From the darkness slowly emerged a giant grotesque flower, with a disgusting shape and rows of teeth sharp as razors, the same dark monster that had sown terror among the elves for years. The elder, on behalf of the tree spirit, swore that they would destroy this monster at any cost, and emphasized that in this final battle, defeat was unacceptable. Finally, after consulting with the elves and carefully preparing for the fight with the dark beast that had settled under the spirit tree, all the beastmen, warriors, and elves gathered in the forest with tense but determined faces. Standing at the front of the support group, Lulanda pressed her hands to her chest and shouted loudly, "Forward." It was an order to start a fight to the death, a sign of uncompromising resistance to protect the peace of everyone. In the silent heart of the ancient forest, the fateful battle with the dark beast officially began. The beastmen and elven warriors lined up for battle, and Lulanda stood in the rear with anxious eyes. She gently squeezed the hem of her tunic at her chest and whispered to herself that she no longer wanted to lose anyone. At that moment, the elven elder loudly ordered the army to prepare to execute the ambush plan and stressed that this battle must not fail. The fate of both races depended on them. At the command, all the beastmen warriors shouted, "Forward," and rushed to the foot of the spirit tree, where the dark beast was hiding. The young beastman charged forward with a sword in hand, his heavy steps thudding the ground in a quick rhythm, while from afar an elf focused magic and released sharp beams of light to assist. Another warrior shouted, "Caught!" as he approached the giant flower, but the monster stood motionless, as if waiting for the victim to come to it. Suddenly, huge spiky tentacles burst out from under the tree, their arcs tearing through the air. A powerful blow threw the attacking warriors backward. They fell to the ground stunned. Choking dust rose and enveloped the battlefield, plunging it into chaos. From afar, Lulanda stood rooted to the spot, eyes wide with horror, while shards and gusts from the creature's echoes whipped her white hair. When the dust settled, the warriors lay scattered on the ground groaning in pain, and the monstrous flower fully opened its mouth, filled with disgusting, razor-sharp fangs. From the monster's body came a deep, contemptuous voice that echoed in the silence and mockingly said, "Just pray if you dare to attack me." And Lulanda felt a chill run down her spine as she faced the cruelty and incredible pressure emanating from that dark, terrifying body. Elven Elder clenched his teeth in bitter admission. The ambush failed. He became a shield for others while the beast mocked. The monster seemed to curl its lips indifferently and smiled contemptuously, throwing out, "Just don't please me with pompous words if so, then willingly accept your fate as my lunch," after which its spiny tentacles began to writhe and crawl on the ground, as if preparing for the next slaughter directly towards Lulanda's position. Seeing that the beast was aiming at the little lady, Rhymer the griffin mother swiftly swooped down from above to cover her and shouted to Lulanda to warn her. The blonde girls froze in shock, watching the approaching monster, while Rhymer spread her majestic wings in defense. Suddenly the beast froze and quietly chuckled goo goo. Yes, recognizing the girl's pure energy, it said, "Child, your magic looks delicious," and then threw out a terrible offer. "Do you want to make a deal with me?" The giant flower opened a terrifying maw right near Lulanda and loudly stated the terms of the deal, pressing on her with a hypnotic tone. "Give yourself to me," promised the beast, "and maybe I will spare all the others here." The offer struck directly at Lulanda's kindness and stunned her. Her eyes widened in horror. She stared into the black abyss in the creature's mouth, waiting to respond. Lulanda trembled and quietly whispered, "You," completely confused, because behind her beastfolk and elven friends writhed in pain. She bowed her head and looked at her hands, while sad memories and guilt flooded her mind. She squeezed her eyes shut and exhaled a long, tired breath, as if standing before a cruel choice of sacrifice, and silence enveloped the white-haired girl, amid a circle of beasts and black roots waiting for the divine child's submission. In her wandering thoughts, Lulanda thought, "If I were my former self," remembered how she was lonely and sad in worn clothes back then, and thought, "Probably I would have obediently given myself to that monster as he asked." The painful image of how her parents abandoned her surfaced again, and with it arose a burning question. Aren't we a family? Memories of relatives' coldness once made her feel that her life was worthless, and the sacrifice seemed inevitable. Lulanda quietly sobbed inside, recalling old wounds, but suddenly a warm light flared in her heart. She slightly opened her eyes and with fervent faith realized, now everything is different. The white strands of her hair trembled in the wind, because the sincere love of Gaes and the villagers returned her courage, and she was no longer a weak child resigned to fate, but ready to rise and defend her true happiness and the happiness of others. Facing the monster's insidious offer, Lulanda did not falter. She immediately loudly called the white horse, "Safio, lift me into the air, please." Safio understood and instantly galloped forward. Gaes, lying on the ground and witnessing this risky act, panicked and shouted her name, while Lulanda deftly jumped onto the horse's back and grabbed the mane as Safio dashed into a gallop, trying to break free from the reach of the black tentacles. Finding herself on the horse, Lulanda closed her eyes for a moment and told herself there was no time to hesitate or be afraid. She resolutely whispered, "I don't want to lose anyone anymore," remembered the warm smiles of Lan and the young beastfolk, and happily realized, "I know that everyone values me." She shone because she understood. This feeling was not pride, but an undeniable truth, and that love became a great strength for her, helping to overcome the darkness of the past. With eyes burning with determination, Lulanda looked at the monstrous flower and loudly exclaimed, "That's why I will never let you eat anyone," and the girl with white hair cast aside fear and promised herself, "Even though I'm scared, I will stand against you." The monster, angered by the stubborn resistance of the human child, released a tar-black aura that engulfed the treetops and thundered threateningly that she was making a terribly foolish choice. The giant flower opened its toothy maw and cruelly declared, "If so, I will use my power and devour you." Lulanda looked at the raging beast with horror, and Safo struggled, trying to dodge. At that moment, a gentle voice from the white horse whispered in her ear, "Lulanda, don't let go." Suddenly, huge tentacles struck exactly where they stood, and the terrible blow forced Safo to leap into the air to protect Lulanda. The fight raged. Safo carried her, weaving through the furious storm of the monster's attacks, and seeing that the girl was distracting its attention. The elf warrior on the ground caught the moment and shouted, Lulanda is distracting it. Who else can fight attack? Grasping Saipho, Lulanda thought. If we keep just running, this will never end. Realizing she had to take a risk, she asked Saipho to get a little closer to the beast. Lulanda silently pondered. If I find its weak spot, elven magic will work. Suddenly, she remembered the magical energy within herself and shouted magic, realizing her natural gift for divine magic. The power that once healed deadly wounds. Lulanda wondered, if so, can I use other types of magic? In the fog of battle, suddenly a new spark of hope flared in the white-haired girl's mind, a way to turn the tide of the fight. High in the sky, Luland closed her eyes and folded her hands in prayer for all the friends fighting below, silently wishing, if only I could defeat that monster with a little magic for everyone's sake. Her determination was so strong that the air around began to change. Suddenly, shimmering lights burst from the crown of the spirit tree, like fireflies, gathered and flew upward to Lulanda and Saipho, who were circling in the sky. Lulanda froze and raised her eyes, wondering, is the spirit tree glowing? She realized that these sparks were not mindless. They seemed to have their own living will, and soon a small shining figure began to take shape before her, a delicate spirit hovering in the air. Lulanda felt a warm sensation spread through her and asked herself, is someone trying to talk to me? The tiny spirit seemed to be trying to telepathically connect with the divine child to deliver an important message. The girl with white hair naively asked, are you a spirit? But the shining creature responded only with mysterious silence, and this worried her. I don't hear a voice. What happened? Are you weakening? I don't hear a voice. I don't hear a voice. What happened? Are you weakening? Meanwhile, down on the ground, the battle raged. Beastmen and elves barely withstood the sweeping blows of the monster's tentacles. Seeing everyone in danger, Lulanda grew increasingly worried and desperately sought a way to help them immediately. Suddenly, an idea struck Lulandi. What if I could borrow the power of this spirit? She remembered how she established a connection with Saipho and the griffins by naming them, and realized, maybe I should give you a name too. In a radiant form, she fully concentrated to find a suitable name. Lulanda quietly, from the heart, whispered, hey, your name is preparing to perform a sacred, intense ritual to connect with the power of the forest. With a determined expression, Lulanda proclaimed the new name of the spirit Frin, and as soon as the name was spoken, she anxiously asked, do you agree? Suddenly, the light around the spirit exploded with a dazzling glow. The dim silhouette became clearer than ever, and Frin began to emit a huge pure energy that enveloped Lulanda. The girl exclaimed in amazement. This is magic, and the divine child felt an incredible power flowing into her body through the newly made pact. Lulanda felt that this magic was much stronger than when I connected with Saipho or the griffins. In the days of light, she saw Frin appear as a beautiful little spirit girl with a bright smile, and Frin gently replied, thank you for the wonderful name, Lulanda. And this acknowledgement awakened all the hidden magical power of the white-haired girl, creating a perfect bond between the human and the forest soul. Frin flew closer, sat on Lulanda's head with a mischievous smile and said, use my magic, because if you keep wasting your own, Lulanda will fall. Understanding the kindness of her new friend, Lulanda urgently begged, Frin, lend me your power, I want to heal everyone. Frin gladly agreed and placed her tiny hands on Lulanda. Instantly, cool green energy passed through the divine child's body, ready to burst out. Lulanda exclaimed with surprise, is this the magic of Frin? Warmth spread across her chest, and she quietly decided, I want to heal everyone who suffers. Luland looked down at the battlefield, where her friends lay scattered and groaning in pain. Her gaze sharpened and became steel-like, and she resolutely declared that she would no longer allow anyone to suffer. The divine child prepared to unleash an unprecedented large-scale healing spell, standing on Saipho's back. Luland spread her arms and released pure white light that enveloped the entire area under the spirit tree, and the motionless beastfolk and elves suddenly felt relief as their bleeding wounds began to close. The stunned beastfolk warrior stood up, not understanding what was happening, and felt strength returning to him, while the beastwomen behind were no less amazed as their severely wounded comrades instantly regained consciousness and stood up. The beastfolk named Sheeta looked at his hands in shock and exclaimed that his wounds were healing. He raised his eyes to the sky and realized, was this Luland's magic? Above, Luland smiled happily, thinking how good it was that she could help everyone, but the warrior's recovery enraged the monster. It opened its grotesque maw and roared, annoying rascals, I warn you, even if you heal, I will devour every last one of you. The fight suddenly intensified as the creature prepared to deliver a suicidal strike. Having received the spirit's help, Lulanda stared into Frin's shining eyes and urgently asked, Frin, will you help me destroy that monster? The little spirit smiled, nodded, and replied, understood, Lulanda. They exchanged a trusting glance before launching a counterattack. Lulanda held her hands forward, and Frin fluttered around gathering magic, and the girl shouted loudly, let's fight together. Creating a powerful alliance of human will and the natural force of the forest. Frin hovered next to Lulanda and began to suggest, imagine a very strong wind. Because I am the spirit of the wind, Lulanda asked sweetly. Wind, the spirit continued, just imagine it and direct your magic at it. And the rest leave it to me, she said, and the girl with white hair squeezed her eyes shut to concentrate, whispered wind, very powerful wind, and white sparkling gusts began to burst from her small hands, preparing a storm for the assault. Instantly winds gathered from everywhere around Lulanda and Sappho and formed a giant whirlwind. The girl gasped with delight. It looked like a tornado. The wind howled with piercing screams and spun at a terrible speed, shaking the treetops, and the fierce wind art shot out with such force that the ground beneath the spirit tree began to crack, heading straight for the gaping, stunned monstrous flower below. The monster howled in terror as the immense force rushed at it. The whirlwind fell so fast that escape was impossible. The creature's spiky tentacles broke free and were torn apart by the storm, and the white glow of wind magic enveloped the battlefield with a majestic spectacle that took the witness's breath away. What power this divine child unleashed. The monster flower recoiled and suffocated. It was just prey. In pain, it tried with its last tentacles to cover its base, and Fryn noticed this and shouted to Lulanda, "Look at the part the monster is trying to protect." The spirit emphasized, "If that place is not destroyed, it is not the end yet." Lulanda looked down and loudly shouted to those below, "Everyone aim right at that spot." Lulanda pointed at the enemy and decisively ordered, "The mouth the monster protects is its weak spot, hit there." The monster roared in fury, "You brat!" The elf elder took the opportunity and shouted, "Beastmen, follow me." He and the burly beast warrior charged forward side by side, weapons ready. They coordinated to break through the last obstacles and delivered a decisive blow to the vulnerable spot of the fierce flowers. The blade whooshed through the air as the beast warrior swung in a powerful arc straight through the monster's grotesque maw. At that moment, the supporting magic of the elf elder exploded, creating a stunning shockwave. The monstrous flower howled mournfully. Its only weak point was shattered, closing this chapter with a precise deadly strike that meant the fall of the creature that had terrorized the village for so long. The combined strike of Lulanda's spirit and the warrior's physical cut caused a terrible echo. Endless sharp shards, like magical blades, rushed at the enemy. The elf elder waved his hand and directed those shards at the weakened flower. The creature howled in pain, "Aaa." As dozens of razor shards pierced its grotesque body simultaneously, and this became the turning point. The long undefeated opponent finally staggered on the brink of collapse. The monster began to crumble into large pieces with a dry crackling, grinding its teeth in fury and uttering its last words. "You miserable children, you only pray, yet you dare." Lulanda stood aside and watched the scene. Her face still stunned, she silently felt the forest's relief as the monster's darkness receded. But the black mist from the spirit tree still rose, reminding of the deep wounds that had tormented the ancient tree for so long. And the monster's form completely dissolved. Silence fell over the foot of the spirit tree. It lay bare and rough. The elf elder and beast warrior stood stunned by the harsh reality before them. And then suddenly all the beastmen from the village and the entire elf tribe raised their weapons and hands to the sky and shouted excitedly, "Wah!" Celebrating this historic victory, their cries echoed through the mountains and forests, as if washing away hostility and distance between races after the life-and-death battle. Sappho gently placed Lulanda on the soft green grass. The white-haired girl rushed forward and placed her small hands on the rough bark of the huge tree. Lulanda blossomed with a smile and whispered, "Spirit tree, I am so glad you're safe." At the same time, the liberating spirit hovered before the girl with a sad gaze. The tiny spirit silently bowed its head, as if feeling the pain pulsing in the life sap of this sacred species of trees. Fryn said heavily, revealing a bitter truth that instantly wiped the smile from Lulanda's face. "The spirit of this tree actually has almost no strength," Lulanda asked in shock. "But why such a huge, such a strong tree?" The spirit explained that this villain not only used the elf tribe as victims, but also insidiously parasitized, relentlessly sucking mana from the very roots for years, and turning what was once the soul of the ancient forest into an empty corpse that slowly withers. The elder elf froze and exclaimed, "What?" He realized with horror that his people had been too relaxed, thinking that sacrifices alone would be enough to protect the spirit of the trees. Fryn continued, explaining that the treacherous demon was so cunning that the spirits weakened and could not even cry out a warning. Although the tree spirit clung to life for a long time, its source was almost depleted, and the elder elf panicked, asking if there was any way to save it, because if the spirits disappeared, the elves would lose their ancestral source of power. The elder elf bowed his head in anxiety and helplessly admitted, "But right now we have no Yadariki strong enough to save the tree." Lulanda asked confusedly, "Yadariki, what is that?" At that moment Fryn approached the blonde girl, his eyes shining with hope. The spirit confidently stated that although the elf tribe lacked it, she believed it was still possible to save everything because an extraordinarily special entity was present here. Fryn looked straight into Lulanda's eyes and kindly said that now that Lulanda was here, the white-haired girl froze and looked at me in surprise, while the little spirit explained that Lulanda had a wonderful connection with the spirits. Even Fryn's ability to restore mana so quickly was thanks to the pure energy radiated by the divine child. Fryn emphasized that usually, even with strong affinity, recovery would not be so fast, and this proved that the girl had an invisible but incredibly powerful protective force. Fryn, with a serious expression, earnestly asked, Lulanda, with your special connection to the spirits, you can definitely intervene in the very life essence of the tree spirit. The little spirit took the white-haired girl's hand and firmly said, Lulanda, please help save the spirits in this great tree. Lulanda met Fryn's trusting gaze and felt the weight of great responsibility. Silently, she decided not to let anyone's sacrifice be in vain. She nodded resolutely and boldly replied, Yes, if it is within my power, I am ready for anything. Clasping her hands on her chest with a determined smile, she whispered, I want to help everyone. Fryn was delighted and quietly thanked her. Thank you very much, Lulanda, then gestured for the girl to come closer to the trunk. Lulanda stepped decisively toward the tree spirit, preparing for the most powerful healing ritual yet. Following the spirit's guidance, Lulanda approached the bare trunk, closed her eyes to concentrate, gathered all the mana in her palms and touched the rough bark, whispering to herself, Focus mana stronger, feeling gentle warmth seep through her fingers and whispered that she felt warm. In the darkness of her mind, Lulanda began to see tiny sparks of light appearing around and wondered, were these the souls of the spirits needing rescue and carrying a burning desire to save all those little creatures? Suddenly, light burst from Lulanda's palms, a dazzling white glow enveloped the base of the spirit tree. This mighty saving magic crawled along the branches and seemed to sanctify the ancient forest, but having spent too much strength in an instant, Lulanda felt her body weaken and exclaimed, Mana is. Her legs gave way, she collapsed to the ground, and panic broke out around. This was the moment when she gave her last strength to fulfill her vow. Immediately Gaia rushed forward to grab Lulanda, and in anxiety shouted her name Lulanda. The young beastman pressed the breathless girl to himself, his face full of extreme worry, and at that moment something strange happened. The great tree spirit suddenly flared with light and disappeared, leaving everyone stunned. Elves and beastmen froze as if rooted to the ground, stunned, unable to understand why the sacred sign of the ancient forest suddenly vanished without a trace. Mid the commotion where the great tree had dissolved, sparkling granules began to fall like stardust, gently settling around Gaes and Lulanda. Griffin's mother and offspring approached, their eyes wide with admiration at this ethereal spectacle. Suddenly, a tiny sprout shimmering with silver light gently fell into Lulanda's outstretched palms. The white-haired girls froze, looking at the strange object in her hand, and whispered, What is this, and how? Everyone's curiosity was sparked by the miraculous rebirth that had just occurred. The spirit Fryn hovered before Lulanda and smiled, explaining that this was the yandere of the tree spirit, which she had reconnected. These words stunned the elder elves standing behind them. They could hardly believe their eyes, and exclaimed that it was unimaginable. Right here a new yandere was being born, while Gaia still looked innocent and worried as he asked Fryn what this meant for their future. Fryn began to explain in detail that the tree spirit does not always remain in one place. It can transform into a yandere, and its air carries it and transplants it elsewhere. The spirit also told that the great tree was once brought and planted in this forest long ago by elven ancestors. If the demon had not drained its energy, the tree spirit could have grown this new sprout earlier, but now, thanks to Lulanda's power, the sprout is securely protected and the spirit's dwelling was not destroyed, and Fryn looked at Lulanda with deep gratitude and gently said, Lulanda, I sincerely thank you for saving the spirits, although I know it exhausted you greatly. The white-haired girl smiled sincerely, truly happily, and quietly said, Yes, after which Lulanda glanced at the tiny sprout in her hands, and shyly asked Fryn what they should do with this special yandere so that it would grow as best as possible. Fryn pondered and advised to look for another suitable place for the seedling, categorically not the old plot, because the mana there was corrupted and turned into chaos by the evil demon. When asked about other spirits, Fryn said they are now resting in yandere and most likely will need a lot of time to appear again, but if Lulanda continues to pour her warm mana into them, they will recover much faster, and this thought saddened the girl a little, because she did not want to part with her spirits for long. The elder elf stepped forward with sorrow on his face and a solemn appearance, and loudly said that for the elven people the salvation of the tree spirit's soul and its spirits is a great grace. He and his companions bowed deeply to show Lulanda their deepest gratitude, because Gaes and all the beastmen warriors risked their lives in battle, and the sight of proud elves now bowing to their comrades became a truly sacred moment of unity. The battle came to an end, and a new hope was born for all races. After the battle in the forest, one warrior of the beastfolk stepped forward on behalf of all and sincerely thanked Lulanda, confessing that if we had sacrificed Luland and others, our tribe would have been destroyed. He said that it was the brave words of the girl that helped them survive, and sincerely thanked the warriors who stood shoulder to shoulder. Then the elder elf fell silent, and with a tremor raised an important question. The spirit of the tree yandere wants to stay near Lulanda, so he shyly made an unexpected request. Would your people allow the elven tribe to continue traveling with you? The beast warrior smiled kindly and reassured the elder elf. Do not worry about the past, we defeated the enemy even before that sacrifice. No one held a grudge, and he loudly declared. We all fought that monster together, so let us move forward together. This agreement deeply moved the elder elves. They all bowed, apologized, and sincerely thanked the beastfolk for forgiveness. But after that moment of unity, all eyes turned to Lulanda with some unusual seriousness. Gaes stood beside Lulanda with a worried expression. The air suddenly tensed, and one of the adults in the group looked directly at the white-haired girl and skeptically asked, Child, you really are not an ordinary person, are you? They argued that an ordinary child could never have made a pact with the spirit of the wind and wield such powerful divine magic. Under the expectant gazes, Lulanda's face paled and trembled. She froze when asked the most direct question about her truth. Who are you really? Lulanda stood silently before the beastfolk and elves, her lips trembling, preparing to say the secret she had long feared, and after a minute of hesitation gathered her courage and, choking on emotions, blurted out. I may be that divine child. The sudden confession of the white-haired girl instantly plunged everything around into eerie silence. Lulanda bowed her head under the dim forest light, allowing all whom she loved to see the truth about her noble but cursed origin. The beastfolk Nilshi closed his eyes, thoughtfully and calmly replied, Yes, I already had some vague suspicion, and recalled that Lulanda could connect with both the griffin and the skyhorse, and once saved a severely wounded person in the old settlement. All signs pointed exactly there. Lulanda cried out in confusion to herself, If I really am the divine child, then the attack on Nilshi's village is my fault, and her heart clenched with the certainty that her existence brought others the pain of separation. Behind the backs of the beastfolk warriors, shadows grew like unshakable shields. One of them firmly said, It is not your fault at all, Lulanda, and explained that the cruelty was caused by villains who abused the name of the divine child, not by her. Nilshi looked at Lulanda with tenderness and said, I have always considered you an important part of the team, Lulanda. He added that no one in the group would blame a family member, and this touched Lulanda so much that she choked back a sob. Lulanda lowered her head, gripping the hem tightly so that her hands trembled, and sobbing confessed, Actually, I have long known that I am a divine child, but I was silent out of fear, sincerely apologizing for hiding the truth for so long. But then Lulanda raised her eyes to everyone. Her eyes were tearful but full of love, and she shouted, I truly love you all. I want to be with you forever. Her sincere feelings from the depths of her heart moved everyone present. The beast warrior smiled broadly and warmly replied, Of course, that is clear. He and his comrades stepped forward and loudly said, Whether Lulanda is a divine child or someone else, you are always the most important to us. Seeing the smiles and unconditional support of the beast friends, Lulanda could not hold back tears of joy flowing down her cheeks. Her heart felt warm, like a strong embrace, as she realized she had finally found the place where she belongs. When Gaia saw that his friend was sobbing, he panicked and shouted, Lulanda, don't cry. The young man awkwardly did not know how to comfort her, and Lulanda wiped her tears and giggled, saying she only cried because she felt great relief. In this warm atmosphere, the freed spirit flew up and cheerfully said, Yes, with such compatibility, it is really clear that you are a divine child. The joyful moment between the two children and the little spirit dispelled all fears about her different status. After the touching moments, the leaders, elves, beast people, and Teacherland gathered in a wooden house to discuss the future. The beast warrior calmly noted that since the matter with the tree spirit was resolved, they should move to a safer place, emphasizing that given the high likelihood that Lulanda is a divine child, it is best to avoid approaching the human kingdom. Lan was worried. The danger was not only from humans but also from other beast people tribes who could kidnap the girl, so they decided not to flee, but to find a way to become strong enough to protect Lulanda and the group's peace. In a modest wooden house, the beast warrior nodded in agreement and thoughtfully said, Yes, instead of constant running, we should look for a place to settle forever, adding an important detail. Lulanda once came to me and said that the girl dreamed of creating a land where beast people could live in peace, and confirmed that although this is a difficult goal and nothing will change until they start, he resolutely declared, With these hands, we will build a safe home and become strong enough to protect it. The beast warrior smiled and asked everyone, Do you think this is a great idea? Before the silence could fade, another beast person loudly exclaimed, I want such a place too. One by one, the elven elders and others agreed. It seems to me a very noble thought. Teacher Lan also smiled with hope and thought to herself, If only I could help create this place. Lulanda, standing next to Gaia, was illuminated by support and blossomed into a radiant, happy smile. Having agreed, the group began studying the old map spread out on the wooden table. The beastman warrior resolutely declared, First of all, we will find a new base, emphasizing that we need to find a place where the sapling of the tree spirit can thrive and where everyone will live in peace. Teacher Lan thoughtfully suggested, Why don't we go south to the sea? She explained that, first of all, we need to move away from the kingdoms of Faratrof and Miga, where that false divine child is hiding, and advised everyone to live in hiding for now to be safe. Beastman decisively made the final decision. All right, when we are ready we will head south to find our own stronghold. Outside, the scene changed. The bright sun flooded the majestic mountains and the wave-like green forests. The migrating group, uplifted in spirit after repelling the threat, all together headed to the distant promised land, where they hoped to find lasting peace for their families, which included representatives of different species. In the elf village of Lulanda, she was busily packing things into a large bag, while young griffins curiously circled around. One chirped this one, and that one too, and seeing that their little mistress was embarrassed, two more eagerly offered. "Let us help you get ready." Lulanda quietly giggled. "Hee hee, thank you very much." And on the eve of departure, there was a warm and lively atmosphere. People and spirit beasts helped each other. She looked at her bulging bag and quietly worried. "Looks like I overdid it a bit," straining to push the bag while two griffins stubbornly tried to stuff even more into it, and at that very moment, the elder elf drew back the curtain and entered the room, gently asking, "Lulanda, are you ready to leave the village?" And the girl raised her eyes, a little surprised by the sudden appearance of the respected leader. Noticing her awkwardness near the chaotic pile of things, the elder elf smiled gently and reassured her. "It's all right, there is still time before the caravan departs," he said to Lulanda. "We are not fleeing anywhere urgently, so don't rush to pack." And Lulanda sighed with relief, cheerfully replied, "Yes, sir," and again busily fussed with the bag. Flexible but clumsy help from the spirit beasts. In a moment, the entire migrating squad of beastmen and elves gathered at the edge of the forest. The beastman warrior resolutely announced, "It seems everyone is ready." He gave a gesture and declared, "So let's head south." Lulanda threw the large backpack over her shoulders and, shining with joy, stood next to Gaia, silently deciding that they would find the place where they truly want to live at their own pace. The journey began as the group walked under dense canopies in the morning light. The beastman fighter went ahead with the map, and Gaes and Lulanda cheerfully swayed among the companions. Lulanda looked up through the leaves at the clear blue sky and quietly thought, "I hope we soon find a place where we can live." Walking beside her, teacher Len smiled warmly and gently agreed, "Yes, that's right, Lulanda," and this filled the whole group with calm and confidence. After walking a bit, they suddenly stopped before a wide river blocking the way, and the beastman warrior thoughtfully remarked, "A river, huh?" He noticed that the water looked deep and the surface very wide, so crossing it would not be easy. Lulanda stood on the riverbank with the young griffins. Anxiety was visible on her face. Teacher Lan came closer, looked around, clicked her tongue and said, "It seems no one has stepped here before, and there is no trace of a bridge. What shall we do now?" Standing before the wide river blocking the way, Lulanda beamed with joy and excitedly told Gaes and the group that the spirit beasts would ferry everyone to the other side. Gaes looked surprised and asked if they could really rely on that. Immediately the spirit friend appeared and cheerfully added, "I will use wind magic to safely carry everyone across the river." And suddenly, a warm scene of mutual aid arose. Noble griffins began carrying the warriors on their backs, and Friend's magic created gusts of wind that lifted people above the water. Lulanda stood on the shore, watching and exclaimed with admiration, "Wind magic." Her eyes sparkled as she saw Friend controlling the shimmering currents, helping the villagers. The divine child recalled Friend's words about her wonderful affinity with the ancient forest spirits, and her thoughts soared. Lulanda pondered, "Will I ever be able to master wind magic like Friend?" The desire to become stronger and personally protect her new family flared up again in her heart. When everyone finally crossed the river safely, the beastfolk warrior loudly commanded, "All right, let's rest here a bit." Lulanda addressed the small spirit hovering nearby and said, "Friend, you should rest too." Friend smiled and explained, "Actually, I am a spirit, so I don't need rest like humans do." Then the little spirit gently added, "Since Lulanda asked, I will rest with everyone," and they all settled on the lush grass next to the griffins basking in the warm sunlight. During the rest, Lulanda asked with curiosity, "Friend, why don't I see other spirits so clearly, but I see you so well?" Friend quietly smiled and explained that it was partly thanks to Lulanda's pure mana, and added that she herself actively expends mana to manifest and produce sounds so everyone can perceive her. The spirit also warned the girl that if she became inattentive or her mana weakened, Friend's image would fade and become like a speck of light, which greatly surprised Lulanda and caused her quiet exclamation, after which she lay down on the grass next to Friend and whispered, "Hey Friend, can I really use wind magic?" To which Friend instantly summoned a small swirling breeze in the air as proof and excitedly replied, "Of course, we made a pact, so you definitely can," smiling encouragingly. "Next time I will patiently teach you how to control it." And hearing this confident promise, Lulanda's eyes lit up with joy and she exclaimed, "Really, thank you so much, Friend." Lulanda impatiently pushed the conversation, "So, can I use other elemental magics for liberation?" After reflection and analysis, although wind magic seems the most compatible, I believe you can use many others as well. The spirit confirmed that Lulanda is very special, and her fate is tightly intertwined with the spirit world. Fryn gently advised that if she truly wants, she can befriend many other spirits, and the white-haired girl smiled happily and resolutely replied, "Yes, Fryn, please teach me a lot about other spirits." The sky was clear, white clouds drifted slowly, giving a peaceful atmosphere. Young griffins curled up in balls on the grass and growled contentedly grr grr, so pleasant. Lulanda spread her arms, feeling the cool breeze, and exclaimed, "What wonderful weather! Relaxing like this is true happiness." The girl felt true freedom living among nature and sincere friends, and the tension from the long, exhausting journey slowly melted away. Lulanda gently hugged the young griffin's neck, and after some time felt its soft fur whisper, "Morph morph," so tenderly, as the beast pressed against his little lady in a usual affectionate gesture. Under the gentle caresses of her beast spirits, Lulanda's eyelids grew heavy with fatigue. Laying her head on the soft fur, she slowly sank into a deep sleep in the silence of the forest, and the sun rays danced on her pure white hair. After a short, pleasant sleep, Lulanda suddenly woke up and whispered embarrassedly, rubbed her eyes, sat among the still sleeping griffins and scolded herself, "Oh no, I overslept," then panicked and shouted, "Everyone, wake up." She froze, seeing ahead a large number of beast people and elves all looking at her with mysterious expressions. Lulanda thought anxiously, what are they doing?" And at that moment someone waved a hand, and from afar a call sounded, "Lulanda." The whole hamlet suddenly sang in unison, "Happy birthday, Lulanda." Led by Gaia and teacher Lan, Gaia beamed the brightest smile he had ever had, and the beast warrior standing behind him also shone with light. Lulanda froze, her lips trembled. She whispered, "Ah, right," and her throat tightened as she realized that today was her birthday. A wave of strong emotions rose in the divine girl's heart as she understood. "So everyone always remembered my day," and the scene closed with tears of happiness from the white-haired girl, shining with the boundless love of her new family, and Lulanda, immersed in thoughts, recalled everything. That painful moment when Uncle Otto died, and everyone had to flee together, the fateful meeting with the elf tribe, and the life-and-death battle against the giant distorted flower beast. She realized that in those crazy, dangerous days, she never even had time to think about what day it was, so Lulanda was deeply touched to learn that even in trouble, everyone remembered and found time to arrange another birthday celebration for her. Teacher Lance smiled gently and came closer, explaining that since the group was still on the road, it would not be possible to arrange a big celebration like before, but she assured her that everyone still wanted to truly celebrate you. At that moment, Gaia excitedly revealed another surprise this time. The celebration would be not only for Lulanda, but for everyone together. Hearing this, the white-haired girl happily exclaimed, "Yes, I also want to celebrate with everyone," and a warm mood spread throughout the resting group. One by one, her beast people companions approached and shouted the best wishes. "Happy birthday, Lulanda. Happy birthday to you." The white-haired girl was filled with joy and then continuously thanked her close friends. Lulanda, light on her feet, confidently walked on the lush grass. Each of her steps seemed to pulse with energy and hope for a bright future with her new family. The elder elves of the clan also stepped forward without hesitation and sincerely congratulated the divine child with deep, warm voices. "Happy birthday, child." Recognition and care from the elves, who usually kept their distance, surprised and comforted Lulanda. She blossomed with the brightest smile of her life in response to the sincere love of all and felt the bonds between races strengthening. Around them, the celebration was noisy. Young beast people brought baskets of fruits and food to share with Lulanda, while the elder elves watched from afar, smiling with satisfaction at this harmony. Lulanda happily savored every moment with her loved ones, and just as she was engrossed in conversation, Gaes approached from behind and quietly said her name to get her attention. He looked at her with tenderness and sincerely thanked her, suddenly blushed, and shyly admitted that today was also his birthday, to which Lulanda exclaimed in surprise, "Gaes, happy birthday to you too." Then he touched her hand behind her back and shyly added, "Actually, I have something. I made it myself from things I found in the forest," thus preparing a sincere gift for Lulanda. Gaes extended a delicate handmade hairpin made from a dry twig, entwined with wildflowers and tiny sparkling beads extremely fragile. Lulanda gasped, "A hairpin." Her eyes lit up with joy at this touching gift. She rushed to grab him and exclaimed, "I am so happy, thank you very much, Gaia." Then Lulanda eagerly brought the hairpin to her white hair and, intertwining her fingers, tried to secure it as best as possible. When the hairpin finally held, Lulanda shyly turned to Gaia and asked how she looked. The young beast person froze for a moment at her beauty and only stammered, "Ah, it suits you very well." Seeing Gaia blush, Lulanda suddenly froze and, frightened, realized something important. She sadly bowed her head and whispered, "Gaia, forgive me, I didn't prepare a gift for your birthday at all," and her disappointed, guilty expression made everyone fall silent. Seeing her reproach, Gaia laughed, waved his hand, and firmly reassured her. "You don't need to worry about that. Lately we've been busy fighting monsters," he said, adding that for him it was enough just to see Lulanda happy. Lulanda still looked decisively into Gaia's eyes and promised, Gaia, I will definitely give you a very special gift later to make up for it. Hearing her sincere promise, Gaia smiled happily and replied that if she was serious, he would look forward to that gift. Two senior beast warriors stepped forward, with Gaias on their shoulders, smiled and said, Lulanda is already 9 years old, isn't she? Joining the congratulations. Happy birthday, child, which made the blonde girl bloom and reply, thank you very much. At that moment, Teacher Lan approached her and gently asked, Lulanda, are you happy? The divine girl quietly nodded, her eyes shining with satisfaction from everyone's care. Lulanda blossomed with an incredible smile and firmly said, yes. Teacher Lan felt quietly added with relief, that's wonderful. At that moment, the young griffins excitedly approached and shouted in unison, Lulanda, we also have gifts for you. The white-haired girl froze in surprise. What kind of surprises had her spirit friends in the form of animals prepared for her? The young griffins began chirping in rhythm to a song they had learned from the spirits, and Lulanda giggled, asking, is this the song you learned from the elves? She spread her arms wide, hugged the spirit animals to herself, and sincerely said, thank you all. One griffin snuggled up to his little mistress and playfully said, you're welcome, pet us more. All right, she replied. Meanwhile, everyone was safe, and O brought a basket to join the celebration. Saifo raised a basket filled with ripe, fragrant forest fruits. Lulendo exclaimed with delight, wild berries, so many. She rushed to hug the white horse's neck and whispered, Saifo, thank you very much, I love you the most. Spirit Frin appeared, hovered, and watched the scene, smiled and said, Lulanda is really loved so much, isn't she? And these words made Lulanda blush a little and feel her heart fill with warmth. Mid the joy, a slight doubt suddenly crossed Lulanda's mind. Is it normal that I am receiving so much happiness? Seeing her thoughtful expression, a warrior from the beast tribe firmly said, just enjoy today. Don't worry about anything, he said, pointing to the tent. An old woman is calling you there. Lulanda cast aside her small worries and quickly ran to the teacher. When Lulanda approached, the old beastfolk smiled kindly at her and remarked, Lulanda, you have grown a bit lately. The white-haired girl enthusiastically raised her hand to measure her height and exclaimed, yes, I have grown. The old woman gently stroked her head and warmly said, happy birthday, Lulanda. The girl responded loudly and emotionally, thank you, grandmother, feeling the protection of the eldest matriarch in the tribe. The old beastfolk slowly took out a neatly folded set of new clothes and gently said, I sewed this myself for you. Try it on, Lulanda. As soon as Lulanda put on the new dress, she gasped, wow, how beautiful. The dress was decorated with delicate patterns that highlighted her purity. Lulanda twirled with delight and exclaimed, thank you, grandmother, and this warmed the heart of the old woman who loved this child so much. Lulanda excitedly added, now I will go show everyone. She rushed off, her skirt fluttering in the wind, and her radiant smile never faded. She went to find the Gaias and young beastfolk to show off her new dress and special hairpin. Seeing the innocence and happiness of this divine child, everyone in the traveling group felt as if the burdens of the journey had melted away. Standing alone with her reflection in the river, Lulanda thoughtfully thought, maybe I really am a divine child. She clenched her hands on her chest and whispered to herself, maybe I have a very special source of power, and this feeling grew stronger in her heart. Lulanda decided, if I have something truly special, I will learn and strengthen it to help everyone. Raising her eyes to the sky, she spoke with determined will, and I want to become even stronger. She longed to have enough strength to protect everyone she loves, so that no one would suffer from separation or pain anymore. With this passionate determination, Lulanda, together with Gaes, Teacher Lan, Beastfolk warriors, and Spirit Beast companions, continue the journey, carrying as provisions the warmth of their bonds to build a better future. After a long, exhausting migration, the group decided to stop and rest by a glowing campfire deep in the forest. Meanwhile, the young Beastfolk Nil declared this place suitable for camp because monsters rarely roam here. Teacher Lan nodded in agreement and said that after so many consecutive shocks, everyone simply needed a little rest. To ensure the peasant's sleep was completely safe, it was decisively announced to Nilshi that strict alternating watches would be arranged at night. At the same time, Lan smiled warmly at Lulanda, reassuring her that there was no need to worry. Griffin guardians and sky horse deeds were still patrolling above them, and Lulanda, hearing this, sighed with relief and sat by her backpack to enjoy the cool breeze. After resting a bit, Lulanda began looking for her loved ones. Finding no one, she approached two girls from Beastfolk, Shinomi and Rachari, to ask if they had seen Gaes. However, Shinomi only shook her head and admitted that she did not notice where that young beastfolk had gone. So interested and a little worried, Lulanda continued wandering the camp in search of her friend. Peering into thick bushes and through green leaves, when suddenly she noticed two small griffins standing guard under a giant tree root. This made her cautious, and she decided to approach to check if something unusual was hiding behind it. Approaching, Lulanda quietly asked both griffins what was happening here, but one of them immediately ordered her to be silent with a look. Only then did Lulanda notice in shock that Gaes had pressed himself against the tree trunk and was sleeping soundly, quietly and evenly snoring, and seeing her friend so exhausted after a long journey, who had given all his strength, she was moved and quietly smiled with relief. Silently watching Gaes sleep, Lulanda suddenly remembered their sacred oath, and the resolute fist touches under the moon. She thought that from that moment of unity until now. Guy always seemed strong and never complained about fatigue. Luland looked at his sleeping face and wondered what amazing things he might be dreaming about. Suddenly Lulanda's gaze fell on his beastly ears and fluffy tail trembling from breath, and her heart trembled from the soft, seductive morph beauty of that fur. Her hands trembled, a burning desire to touch and feel its warmth overwhelmed her, and she slowly stretched out her hand, as if enchanted by the grace of that young beastman, but at the moment when her finger was almost touching. Lulanda gasped and jumped back, remembering the strict prohibition that beastmen allow their ears and tail to be touched only by a life partner. And a fierce struggle began in her mind, on one side an angel urging restraint not to break the rule, and on the other a little devil inciting, saying a light touch is no big deal. While she fussed and clenched her hands from the surge of passion, two griffins politely offered that she could instead comb them, but Lulanda decisively waved them off and firmly resolved to hold back. Luland, with a heavy heart, quietly and sternly ordered herself never to touch Gaia's fur again to preserve her friend's honor. Although she tried to step away, the allure of that fluffy fur still pulled her, and Lulanda could not resist. She cast another glance back. Her mind seemed completely consumed by a powerful morphine desire. Her eyes flickered like stars, and her hands trembled with longing. The scene closed with Lulanda standing, wavering between burning desire and inner conflict, as an irresistibly attractive story of Gaia unfolded before her. Lulanda staggered in a wild inner conflict, clenching her hands and shaking her head again and again to ward off the urge to touch Guy's fur. She repeated to herself that touching his ears and tail was strictly forbidden. But seeing Gaia soundly asleep under the tree, another thought arose: the desire to stroke that soft fur became so strong it seemed uncontrollable. Hesitating slightly, Lulanda slowly stretched out her small palm, calming herself with the thought that just stroking his head would be okay. In the silence of the forest, where leaves floated on the breeze, she crept closer and gently placed her hand on the hair of the sleeping beast boy. As soon as she touched his hair, Lulanda smiled with complete satisfaction and happiness, thinking how soft and straight Guy's hair was, and even stroked her own hair to compare. She was surprised to notice that although they both washed with the same river water, Gaia's hair was noticeably softer than hers. Lulanda blissfully stroked his head, considering it a safe substitute for touching the ears and tail, when suddenly Gaia stirred and woke up. She was so frightened that her face turned pale, and he sleepily asked what she was doing. The girl with white hair trembled and, blushing embarrassedly, confessed that she had just petted him on the head, proudly insisting that she had tried very hard not to touch his ears. Hearing this strange explanation, Gaes only said, "Huh," in surprise, and asked why she did that, and Lulanda, with an innocent expression, asked if she could pet his smooth hair again next time. Embarrassed Gaes replied that anyone could pet him, but when a girl does it, he feels a little shy. He blushed, turned away, and whispered that when a younger girl pets him on the head, he feels very ashamed and a little uncomfortable. Hearing this, Lulanda's face instantly twisted in shock and despair, as if she had been hit hard. Seeing her pitiful expression, Gaia panicked and hastily took back what she said, assuring that everything would be fine if it happened only occasionally. Lulanda's eyes instantly lit up like stars, and she eagerly asked if it was true that sometimes she could pet him. Gaia sighed and gave in, warning that only rarely, and immediately saw Lulanda's smile bloom again. Beast Boy fell silent when she happily clasped her hands and asked if she could pet him once more right now, and Gaia's barked, "Haven't you been petting him the whole time?" Joking a little, Gaia smiled and waved goodbye to Lulanda, heading off to her business and promising that they would see each other again. Lulanda happily replied and watched him go, and at that moment little griffins approached, surrounded her, and chirped persuasively, asking their mistress to pet them just like she petted Gaia. Lulanda smiled and agreed, busy petting each griffin gently in turn, while Gaia's went further, rubbing the spot on his head where she had touched. Beast Boy thought to himself that being petted on the head was nothing scary, but he was a little embarrassed by the unhidden innocence of his white-haired friend. Gaia smiled to herself. Apparently, Lulanda often took care of the griffin family, so her petting was truly skillful and pleasant, and behind him the griffins chirped contentedly while she caressed them. Gaia guessed that they were probably asking their mistress why her petting was so pleasant while he refused, and thus ended the quiet, sweet moment in the forest among their various friends. Gaia stood alone, his face still flushed with embarrassment, and he thought to himself, although Lulanda caressed him and it was so pleasant, he still remained extremely shy. He looked at the two little griffins and realized for them these soft strokes were pure joy without the slightest shyness, and he only sighed thoughtfully. In the memory that surfaced, Guy recalled the painful moment when his father died, and how in despair he ran out of the village alone. Then a clear picture appeared of little Lulanda standing with outstretched arms, as if protecting him from human soldiers. His pride was painfully hurt when he realized that Lulanda, although younger than him, was the one who protected him at his weakest moment, and he clenched his hands in anxious thoughts. To drive away those weak thoughts, Guy suddenly sharply slapped himself on both cheeks, a loud slap to wake up, and he swore with iron determination that he must try and strive even more. In the middle of the endless forest, he raised his fist to the sky and decided to become strong enough to stand on equal footing and protect Lulanda in the future. Time passed, and after a long, continuous journey in the migrating group, fatigue was clearly felt. Lulanda walked as if in a fog, her eyes growing heavy with sleep, and she tiredly rubbed them. Nearby, an uncle from the beast people noticed this and gently asked if she was sleepy, and Lulanda quietly nodded, admitting that she was a little tired. Seeing the little lady completely exhausted, the young griffin approached and offered to let her ride on his back so she could sleep peacefully while moving. But Lulanda gently smiled and refused, insisting that she wanted to walk a little more herself. Then she looked ahead, called Guy's name, and saw his back quietly moving among the group. Lulanda ran up excitedly with a shiny red apple and asked if Guy wanted to take a bite to refresh himself, but to her surprise, Guy did not even turn and coldly replied that he did not need it. The rude refusal and his strange behavior stunned Lulanda. She froze in place, looking at his retreating back, her heart tightening with anxiety. She realized that lately he had been acting strangely. Lulanda froze, looking at Guy's back, and thought that after they together defeated that monster, his mood had completely changed. She remembered that at the birthday he was so cheerful. In the depths of those eyes hid a hidden longing or some unusual pensiveness, and Lulanda desperately wanted to know what he was thinking about, but did not dare to ask. Deep in thought, an Uncle Beastman approached Lulanda and praised her for always finding tasty, non-poisonous food for the group. The white-haired girl smiled brightly and modestly and replied that it was just a coincidence. Another uncle came up with a basket full of fresh fruits and enthusiastically suggested everyone return to the base, saying there were already enough supplies, and Lulanda nodded happily in response. In the camp, an old beast person gently stroked Lulanda's head and sincerely thanked her, saying that thanks to her contribution, everyone would have more strength for tomorrow's journey. The white-haired girl rested her head on her shoulder, and the horse Sappho eagerly helped to stoke the burning fires to prepare the food. Soon juicy pieces of meat were placed on the grill, giving off an irresistible aroma and pleasantly sizzling, so Lulanda and the little griffin could not contain their delight, enjoying a hearty dinner together. After the meal, Lulanda looked around anxiously and asked Ashashio if he had seen Gaia. Ashashio pointed to a distant tree and said that she was sitting there alone. Lulanda noticed the lonely figure of her friend, who was thoughtfully leaning on a log. Lulanda quietly wondered what could be troubling her, but Ashashio advised to leave Gaia alone for now. She probably needed time to sort out her personal matters. Lulanda lowered her head with sad eyes and asked Ashashio if he understood what Gaes was struggling with. He thoughtfully replied that he could only partially guess, gently placed his hand on her shoulder to calm her, and asked her not to worry or carry such a heavy expression on her face. He advised Lulanda that if she was really worried, she should wait for a better time to talk to him directly, and she nodded in agreement, sighing quietly. Soon Lulanda appeared in a new, extremely cute look, her hair neatly braided into two charming braids. Standing nearby was teacher Lan, shining with pride and praising her work, which made the white-haired girl light up with happiness and thank her, marveling at how skillfully Lan braided. Two young beast women ran up excitedly, asking why Lan herself hadn't dressed up, and persistently urged her to try another, more mature and seductive hairstyle. Then suddenly Apothecary Zesh appeared with sparkling eyes and enthusiastically suggested. If Lan changed her hair, she should also do makeup so she would really stand out. This unexpected proposal frightened Lan, and she quickly waved it off, saying such sophisticated grooming was not suitable for her. But Zesh decisively rejected all refusals, saying Lan was also a girl, so the ability to take care of one's appearance was necessary. Boldly grabbed her hand and led her away despite the helpless protests of the companions, and the result of the transformation was truly impressive. Lan appeared with a neatly twisted bun at the nape and gentle makeup, incredibly elegant and cute, and everyone, even Lulanda and the children, exclaimed in unison, "Wonderful," and praised her as if she were a grown lady. Lan blushed shyly from the excessive gazes, hid her face in her hands, and asked people not to look so intently. Zesh teased her and turned to ask Nilshi's opinion, and the young beastman froze for a moment at Lan's beauty. Nilshi, embarrassed, looked away and muttered quietly, then whispered that this look really suited Lan. His awkward compliment embarrassed Lan even more, and she shouted loudly for him to stop looking at her, which made the atmosphere amusingly awkward. Lulanda stood nearby, saw everything, smiled happily, and joked that they seemed very close, but Lan and Nilshi immediately shouted in unison that this was not true at all. They were not close at all. When night fell over the ancient forest, Lulan stood silently on the grass and looked at the starry sky with a sad, thoughtful gaze because of what had happened. She turned and saw Gaia, who was still standing alone under the tree in the dim light, and this gripped her white-haired heart with anxiety for her dearest friend. The chapter ended with a touching scene of two children in the silence of the forest night, and a note announced that the next part would be released on June 30. Standing before the lonely back of her friend, Luland quietly spoke Gaia's name to break the silence. She slowly approached and sincerely offered to sit together and talk about the burdens weighing on him. Seeing Luland's worried expression, Gaia flinched slightly, then turned and looked at his friend with eyes full of unspeakable emotion. After a moment of silence, Gaia sighed quietly and took the initiative, asking Luland if she was very worried about what he had been thinking about lately, and Luland quietly lowered her gaze and could not say a word. Suddenly the air became heavy. Gaia turned his back to her and began staring into the darkness of the forest, as if preparing to reveal his deepest feelings. Gaia began enthusiastically listing Luland's modest feats, how she always found food for everyone, her incredible courage in the fight against the demon, and that she had made pacts with noble spirit beasts, such as the griffin, the celestial horse, and other spirits. Hearing those praises, Luland only quietly, thoughtfully replied, "Yes." Gaia said in a quiet voice that he had always felt Luland was truly extraordinary, perhaps even a real divine child with a power hard to imagine, but suddenly he was overcome with uncertainty, and he admitted that although he constantly talked about the desire to create a peaceful home for everyone, he had actually done nothing truly important. He whispered hoarsely that he felt useless. All he could do was talk, and he lacked the strength to act bravely like Luland. Especially during that recent battle, he was completely helpless and could not help his friend. Hearing how painfully he reproached himself, Lulanda immediately intervened and decisively stated that Gaia was naturally kind and always cared for others, and it was thanks to her quiet support that she was able to overcome so many difficulties. Lulanda looked Gaia straight in the eyes with unwavering determination and firmly said that he was the first to set the goal a safe home, and thanks to this everyone found motivation and now strives to fight together. With a sincere glow in her eyes, she added that it was Gaia's presence and encouragement that gave her the strength to look forward bravely and no longer feel lonely, and decisively stated that he was not at all the useless person he thought himself to be. Her resolute confidence impressed Gaia. He raised his gaze to Lulinda, deeply moved, and quietly thanked her sincerely from the heart for her understanding. Gaia clenched his fists, looked at his palms with burning determination, and loudly declared that from now on he did not want to just talk, he sincerely aspired to become stronger to help the community. Steel determination froze on Beast Boy's face as he said that his greatest goal was to become strong enough to protect everyone and to guard Lulanda as reliably as possible. Lulanda smiled gently and quietly said yes to support her friend's determination. She trustfully observed his inner growth and then, unexpectedly, extended her small hand as a warm invitation. Surprised, Gaia slowly responded and extended his hand to accept this sacred bond. The two children gently clasped palms in the silence of the night, creating a warm, peaceful picture under the dim moonlight, and Lulanda softly whispered, "From now on we will strive together." Gaia looked at her with a rare gentle smile and confidently replied, leaving a clear sign this became a new turning point in their friendship and shared determination. With wide-open, hopeful eyes, Lulanda said she would always pray that Gaia could fulfill his wish and become as strong as he hopes. Gaia smiled gratefully, but then became confused and scratched his head in embarrassment. He quietly whispered a sincere apology for his recent coldness and aloofness, which had caused Lulanda so much anxiety and pain. Lulanda shone with happiness, pressed her hands to her chest, and seeing her innocent smile, said she was glad to finally understand the deep feelings that Gaia had hidden for so long. Gaia also quietly laughed with relief and replied in a gentle voice, and they both enjoyed the quiet peace under the starry sky above the silent ancient trees. The next morning, as sunlight barely filtered through the leaves, Lulanda stood near a small griffin, fresh and radiant, as if freed from all burdens. In the distance she noticed a group of young beastfolk gathered and whispering, and just then Ashita suddenly turned, shouted, "Lulanda!" in surprise, and drew her attention to some strange event. Lulanda froze in amazement when she saw Gaia standing with his back to her. Her eyes widened in shock as she discovered that his ears and tail had completely transformed into shimmering silver, exquisite and amazing, and Gaia shuddered and turned around, blushing under her watchful gaze, as if his iron determination to become stronger had miraculously changed his fur, leaving Lulanda in awe of her friend's magnificent new appearance.